The door slammed open. Caleb Vance stood there like a wounded animal, his scarred face twisted with rage. "Get out!" he snarled at the trembling woman before him. "You think you can survive me?" The crowd gathered outside his porch whispered, waiting for another rejection, another humiliation. But this wasn't about cruelty. It was desperation disguised as brutality. His mother was dying in the room behind him, going blind from something no doctor could name. Every woman who came to marry him failed his impossible tests. And in the back of that sneering crowd, one forgotten soul named Mara Quinn watched and understood what no one else could see. Before we begin, I invite you to stay with this story until the very end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale. The wind carried the stench of desperation through Ridgefall that November morning. It mixed with wood smoke and horse manure, settling over the town like a stained blanket nobody wanted to acknowledge. Folks said you could smell failure before it happened in a place like this, a frontier town clinging to the edge of civilized country, where winter came early and mercy came never. Caleb Vance's ranch sat 3 miles outside town, perched on a ridge that gave the settlement its name. From Main Street, you could see the outline of his property against the mountains, a dark silhouette that reminded everyone of what they weren't: successful, solitary, untouchable. The Vance Ranch had been there longer than most families could remember, built by Caleb's grandfather during the first wave of settlers. Now it belonged to a man the town had decided was either cursed or crazy, maybe both. Sarah Brennan was the 14th woman to try. She rode up that dirt path at dawn, her Sunday dress pressed so hard the creases could cut paper. Her father owned the general store, which meant she'd grown up with more comfort than most, a fact that showed in her soft hands and the way she sat her horse, like she was afraid of wrinkling. The whole town knew she was going because her father had debts, and Caleb Vance had money, the kind of simple arithmetic that turned women into merchandise. Mara Quinn watched from the hill behind the blacksmith shop, where the town's outcasts and drifters usually gathered. She'd been hauling water when she heard the commotion. Women gossiping outside the church, men making bets at the saloon. Another lamb to slaughter, they called it. Entertainment for a Thursday morning. "Fool girl," muttered old Jacob, the half-blind prospector who spent his mornings begging for coffee. "That Vance boy's got the devil in him. Ain't no woman gonna tame that." Mara said nothing. She never did. Speaking required being heard, and the mountain girl, that's what they called her, when they bothered calling her anything, had learned long ago that silence was safer than words that nobody valued. She'd been 17 when her mother died, leaving her alone in a cabin so far up the mountain that most folks forgot it existed. Mary Quinn had been the town's healer once, before the new doctor arrived with his fancy certificates and Eastern education. After that, people stopped climbing the mountain path. They stopped asking for remedies. They stopped remembering that the Quinns existed at all. 3 years had passed since the fever took her mother. 3 years of Mara surviving on what she could trap, forage, and occasionally trade. She came to town once a month, maybe less, always staying on the edges, always unnoticed. At 20, she looked older, not from hard living, though there was that, but from the kind of loneliness that aged you from the inside out. She had her mother's dark hair and angular features, the kind that didn't fit conventional beauty, too sharp in the cheekbones, too intense in the eyes. Men looked past her, and women didn't bother looking at all. She existed in that peculiar category of human being that towns like Ridgefall created, visible enough to be dismissed, invisible enough to be forgotten. But Mara saw things others missed. It was a skill born from being overlooked herself. She saw how Sarah Brennan's hands shook as she dismounted outside Caleb's ranch house, how the girl touched her hair 3 times before knocking, a nervous habit probably, how she straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin, trying to manufacture confidence she didn't feel. The door opened. Caleb Vance filled the frame like a threat. 6'3" of lean muscle and barely contained violence. The scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw caught the morning light, a rope of twisted skin that pulled at his face when he frowned, which was always. His dark hair needed cutting, his shirt needed mending, and his eyes needed something. Mara couldn't name it from this distance, but she felt it, a drowning man's fury at the water. "You Sarah Brennan?" His voice carried across the yard, rough as gravel. "Yes, sir. My father—" "I know what your father wants." Caleb stepped onto the porch, letting the door slam behind him. He wants me to take his debt weight off his hands. Probably told you I'm rich, that you'd be set for life. That about right?" Sarah's face flushed. "My father said you were looking for a wife." "Looking, not begging." He circled her slowly, like a rancher inspecting livestock. "You ever slaughtered a pig?" What?" "Slaughtered. A pig. Stuck a knife in its throat and bled it out?" "No, I haven't." "Delivered a breech calf?" "Mr. Vance, I don't see." "Sewn up a gash that won't stop bleeding? Set a broken bone? Survived 3 days without food or fire?" Sarah's flush deepened to crimson. "Those aren't things a wife—" "They're exactly what a wife here does." Caleb stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to crane her neck to meet his eyes. "This ain't your father's store, girl. This is frontier country. Winter here will kill you faster than any man. Disease, accident, hunger, they don't care about your pressed dresses or your soft hands." "I can learn." "No." The word hit like a hammer. "You can't. Learning takes time, and time kills people out here. I need someone who already knows, someone who won't break when things get hard." He gestured toward the door. "My mother's in there dying because no fancy doctor in this territory can figure out what's wrong with her. The last thing I need is another mouth to feed who can't pull weight." Sarah's eyes welled up. "You're cruel. I'm realistic." Caleb's expression didn't change. "Go home. Tell your father to pay his debts some other way." He turned and walked back inside, leaving Sarah standing in his yard like a discarded thing. She stood there for a full minute, tears streaming down her face, before finally climbing back on her horse and riding away. Mara watched the girl disappear down the ridge path, then looked back at the ranch house. The door hadn't reopened. No movement in the windows. Just silence and the wind pushing tumbleweeds across the yard. "That's 14, old Jacob said, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. 14 women, 14 rejections. Man's got standards higher than the Lord himself." "Maybe he's got reasons," Mara said quietly. Jacob laughed, a wet, rattling sound. "Reasons? Girl, that man's got nothing but pride in that failing ranch. Mark my words, he'll die alone out there, and good riddance." Mara picked up her water pails and started the long walk back to her cabin. But her mind stayed on that ranch house, on the man who rejected women like he was defending a castle, on the mother dying behind closed doors. Her mother's voice echoed in memory. "Pay attention to what people don't say, Mara. That's where the truth lives." Caleb Vance hadn't said he didn't want a wife. He'd said he needed someone who could survive. Someone who already knew. By nightfall, half the town had heard about Sarah Brennan's humiliation. The other half heard about it over breakfast the next morning. Ridgefall thrived on gossip, the way crops thrived on rain. It was essential for growth, even when it drowned everything in sight. The general store became the epicenter of speculation. He asked her if she'd slaughtered a pig. Mary Hutchins clutched her basket like Caleb might materialize and demand she demonstrate animal butchery. "What kind of man asks that?" "The kind who's desperate and too proud to show it," Martha Brennan said bitterly. Her daughter Sarah hadn't left her room since returning. "He parades women up there like livestock and tears them down. It's barbaric. Someone should do something," offered Elizabeth Moore, though her tone suggested that someone should be anyone but her. "Like what?" Martha's laugh was sharp. "The man owns half the ridge and most of the good water rights. Sheriff won't touch him. Mayor won't cross him. We're stuck with him." "Maybe his mother will die soon," Mary Hutchins whispered, immediately crossing herself as if that could unsay the cruelty. "Then he'll have no reason to stay. The ranch will fail and someone decent will take it over." Mara stood in the corner, waiting her turn to trade 3 rabbit pelts for flour and coffee. Nobody acknowledged her presence. They never did. She was furniture that occasionally needed supplying, but she listened. "I heard his mother's got the clouding disease," Martha said. "Eyes going white bit by bit. Dr. Morrison says there's nothing to be done." "Morrison's a charlatan," Elizabeth sniffed. "He couldn't cure a common cold. Remember when my Johnny had the croup? Morrison wanted to bleed him. Bleed a child. Old Mary Quinn would have known what to do." "Mary Quinn's been dead 3 years," Martha reminded her. "I know, but she was the real healer. Morrison's just got certificates that say he knows medicine. There's a difference." The shopkeeper finally noticed Mara. "You here for credit or trade?" "Trade." Mara placed the pelts on the counter. "Flour, coffee, salt, whatever these are worth." He examined the pelts with exaggerated scrutiny, though they both knew they were good quality. "These'll get you flour and coffee. Salt's extra. They're worth more than that. Maybe to someone who needs rabbit pelts. I got a whole stack in back." He was lying. She could see the nearly empty shelf behind him, but arguing meant drawing attention, and attention meant trouble. "Fine. Flour and coffee." As he wrapped her goods, Martha's voice carried clearly, 14 women he's rejected. 14. What kind of woman would even want him now? "The desperate kind," Mary Hutchins answered, "or the foolish kind." Or the kind nobody else wants, Mara thought, the kind who's already invisible. She took her supplies and left without speaking. The conversation continued behind her, speculation building on speculation, the story of Caleb Vance growing more monstrous with each retelling. By next week, he'd probably be described as having horns and breathing fire. The walk back to her cabin took 2 hours. The path wasn't marked on any map, just a deer trail that wound up the mountain through pine forest and rock formations that looked like sleeping giants. Her mother had chosen this location deliberately, far enough from town that the narrow-minded would find excuses not to visit, close enough that those who genuinely needed help would make the journey. The cabin appeared suddenly, as it always did, a small structure built into the hillside, surrounded by the remnants of her mother's garden. Wild herbs still grew in chaotic profusion. Yarrow, comfrey, elderberry, dozens of others. Mary Quinn had taught Mara every plant's name, property, and use before she could read. Knowledge transmitted through necessity, mother to daughter, generation to generation. Inside, the cabin was neat but sparse. One room serving as kitchen, workshop, and living space. A loft where Mara slept. Shelves lined with jars of dried herbs, tinctures, salves. Her mother's journal sat on the small table, its pages filled with careful handwriting documenting every remedy, every success, every failure. Mara lit a fire and made coffee, letting the routine settle her thoughts. But her mind kept circling back to Caleb Vance. 14 women rejected. A mother going blind. A man defending his home with cruelty born from fear. She pulled her mother's journal toward her, opening it to a section she'd read dozens of times. Remedies for eye ailments. Recipes involving chamomile, eyebright, calendula. Instructions for treating infection, inflammation, deterioration. Her mother had treated clouding disease once, years ago. Old Thomas Wright, who'd come up the mountain barely able to see shadows. Mary Quinn had worked on him for weeks, special compresses, dietary changes, herbs burned and inhaled. The treatment had been painful and slow, but it had worked. Mara traced her finger over the recipe. She had everything she needed. The knowledge, the materials, the skill. What she didn't have was an invitation. The next woman arrived at Caleb's ranch 2 days later. Mara wasn't there to witness it, but the story spread through town fast enough. Helen Pritchard, widow of the blacksmith, desperate enough to try. She'd lasted 5 minutes before Caleb asked her if she could amputate a gangrenous limb. She couldn't. He sent her away. 15 rejections. The town's mockery intensified. Jokes about Caleb became meaner, sharper. The mayor gave a speech about certain individuals who thought themselves above community standards. The church ladies organized a prayer circle for his poor mother, though everyone knew they were really praying for gossip material. And through it all, Caleb remained isolated on his ridge, invisible behind his defenses, protecting something nobody understood. Mara understood, not because she was smarter than everyone else, but because she recognized the look in his eyes. The one she'd seen in her own reflection every morning for 3 years. Desperation wearing a mask of strength, fear dressed up as anger, the look of someone who couldn't afford to fail. She spent 3 days arguing with herself. The sensible part of her brain listed all the reasons to stay home. He'll reject you like the others. He'll mock you. The town will mock you. You'll make everything worse. But the other part, the part that sounded like her mother, whispered different truths. Someone's going to die if you do nothing. You have knowledge nobody else has. Isn't that worth the risk? On the 4th day, Mara made her decision. She packed her mother's journal, a selection of herbs and tinctures, and enough supplies for several days. She wrapped everything in oilcloth and secured it to her horse, a sturdy mountain pony that had been her mother's before her. The animal wasn't much to look at, but it could navigate rough terrain in the dark, which mattered more than appearance. She left at sunset, when the town would be busy with evening routines and unlikely to notice one invisible woman riding out. The path to Caleb's ranch wasn't complicated. Follow the ridge road, veer west at the lightning-struck pine, continue until the land leveled out. But simple didn't mean easy. The temperature dropped as night fell. The wind picked up, carrying the promise of early snow. Mara's hands went numb inside her gloves. The horse picked its way carefully across ground that grew increasingly treacherous, loose stones, hidden holes, patches of ice where water had frozen in the ruts. Twice, she almost turned back. Once when the wind nearly knocked her from the saddle. Once when the path narrowed to nothing and she had to dismount and lead the horse around a rock slide. Fear whispered constantly. This is stupid, dangerous. You're going to fall, freeze, die out here, and nobody will find your body until spring. But stubbornness, the Quinn family legacy, pushed her forward. The ranch house appeared around midnight, a dark shape against darker mountains. A single light burned in one window. Smoke rose from the chimney, signs of life in a landscape that felt increasingly hostile to it. Mara dismounted and tied her horse to the fence post. Her legs barely held her weight. Hours in the saddle, followed by the final walk up the ridge, had depleted what little strength the cold hadn't already stolen. Her teeth chattered so hard she bit her tongue, tasting blood. She approached the door and raised her fist to knock, and froze. What was she doing? Showing up uninvited in the middle of the night to offer help to a man who'd made it abundantly clear he didn't want it? This wasn't bravery. This was foolishness bordering on insanity. Turn around, the sensible voice urged. Go home. Forget this. But her mother's voice was louder. Someone's dying. You can help. That's all that matters. Mara knocked. Nothing. She knocked again. Harder. Still nothing. She was raising her fist for a third attempt when the door jerked open. Caleb Vance stood there in his undershirt and pants, clearly roused from sleep or the edge of it. His hair stuck up at odd angles. His scar looked darker in the lamplight, a shadow carved into his face. His eyes, bloodshot and wild, fixed on her with an expression somewhere between confusion and fury. Who the hell are you? Mara Quinn. Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. I'm here about your mother. My mother. He blinked slowly, processing. You're here, in the middle of the night, about my mother. I can help her. Caleb laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Help her. Right. You and every other charlatan in the territory. He started to close the door. I'm not a charlatan. Mara wedged her boot against the frame. My mother was Mary Quinn. She treated eye diseases. She has a documented case of curing clouding disease in her journal. I have the knowledge, the materials, and the skill to help your mother, but only if you let me. Mary Quinn's been dead for years. 3 years. I'm her daughter. I learned everything she knew. Caleb studied her face, really looking at her for the first time. Mara felt the weight of his scrutiny, the same examination he'd given all those other women, but different somehow. Less performative, more desperate. You're the mountain girl, he said finally. The one nobody talks to. That's me. Why would you help? The question caught her off guard. Nobody had ever asked her that before. Because I can, she said simply. Because someone's dying and I have knowledge that might save her. Isn't that enough? Nothing's enough. Caleb's expression hardened again. Go home, mountain girl. We don't need... A scream tore through the house, high-pitched, terrified, the sound of someone in agony. Caleb's face went white. He turned and ran toward the back of the house, leaving the door open. Mara didn't hesitate. She grabbed her pack and followed. The bedroom was small and stifling, a fire burning too hot in the hearth. On the bed, a woman thrashed against restraints that looked like they'd been applied hastily and without expertise. She was thin, too thin, her nightgown hanging off her frame. Her hair, gone mostly gray, stuck to her forehead with sweat. And her eyes, even from the doorway, Mara could see the milky white film covering them. Advanced clouding disease, far worse than she'd anticipated. Mama, it's all right. Caleb knelt beside the bed, trying to hold his mother's hands without triggering more panic. It's just another episode. It'll pass. It hurts. The woman's voice cracked. Oh God, Caleb, it hurts so bad. I know. Mara set down her pack and approached the bed. The woman's screaming intensified. Who's there? She turned her head wildly, searching for threats she couldn't see. Caleb, who's in the house? Nobody, Mama. Someone's here. I hear them. My name is Mara Quinn, Mara said clearly, calmly. I'm Mary Quinn's daughter. I'm a healer. Your son let me in to examine you. I did no such thing, Caleb hissed, but his mother had stopped screaming. Mary Quinn, she whispered. I remember Mary. She helped people. She did. And I'm going to help you. Mara moved closer, kneeling on the opposite side of the bed from Caleb. But I need to examine your eyes. I need to understand what's happening. You can't help. The woman's voice broke on a sob. Dr. Morrison tried everything. There's nothing. Dr. Morrison doesn't know everything. Mara caught Caleb's furious glare and ignored it. May I? The woman nodded weakly. Mara opened the shutters, letting moonlight flood the room. She leaned close, examining the woman's eyes with the methodical precision her mother had taught her. The clouding was severe, yes, but not uniform. Patches of clarity remained. And the pain, the screaming pain, suggested active infection, not just deterioration. When did the pain start? She asked. 2 weeks ago, Caleb answered. Got worse every day. And before that? Just the clouding. Slow, but steady. Morrison said it was degenerative, inevitable. Mara sat back on her heels, her mind racing through her mother's journal. Degenerative clouding didn't cause pain, but infected clouding did. If Morrison had diagnosed it wrong. This isn't degenerative, she said. It's bacterial. An infection in the tear ducts that's spreading to the eye tissue. Left untreated, it will cause complete blindness. But if we act now, what? Caleb's voice shook with something between hope and rage. You'll fix it? Make it all better with your mountain medicine? I'll try. Mara met his eyes. Which is more than anyone else has offered. A long silence filled the room, broken only by his mother's labored breathing. What do you need? Caleb asked finally. Hot water, clean cloths, a bowl, and privacy. Privacy? You can wait outside or stay here silently, but I can't have you questioning every step. Your mother's in pain and frightened. I need her calm to work. Caleb's jaw clenched. Mara could see the war in his expression, the desperate need to help fighting against the learned instinct not to trust. He looked at his mother, at her pain-twisted face, and something in him broke. I'll get the water, he said hoarsely, and left the room. Mara exhaled slowly. She'd cleared the first hurdle, getting in the door. Now came the hard part. Actually healing someone while a volatile, grief-stricken man watched her every move. She opened her pack and began laying out supplies. Herbs for infusion, tinctures for pain management, clean cloths for compress work. Her mother's journal opened to the relevant pages. Everything ready, everything prepared. The woman on the bed watched her with those clouded eyes, seeing nothing but trusting anyway. You really think you can help me? She whispered. I do, Mara said, and prayed she wasn't lying. Caleb returned with a kettle of water so hot steam rose in visible clouds. He set it on the bedside table with exaggerated care, like he was afraid sudden movement might shatter whatever fragile possibility had entered the room. His hands shook. Mara pretended not to notice. Thank you, she said, pouring water into the bowl she'd brought. The herbs went in next, eyebright, golden seal, chamomile, creating a sharp medicinal smell that cut through the stale sickness of the room. What is that? Caleb's mother asked, her voice thin as paper. Medicine, Mara said simply. It's going to feel warm when I apply it. Uncomfortable, but not painful. Can you tell me your name? Catherine Vance. All right, Catherine. I need you to stay as still as possible. Can you do that for me? I'll try. Caleb positioned himself in the corner, arms crossed, watching with an intensity that made Mara's skin prickle. She forced herself to ignore him and focus on the work. Her mother's voice echoed in memory. Doubt kills more patients than disease. If you're going to heal someone, believe you can. She soaked a clean cloth in the herbal infusion, wrung out the excess, and gently placed it over Catherine's right eye. The woman gasped but didn't pull away. Good, Mara murmured. Very good. Now the other side. The second compress went on easier. Catherine's breathing slowed, some of the panic leaving her body. Mara checked the temperature of the water, added more herbs, and prepared the next round. This was the tedious part, hours of repetitive compress work. changing them every few minutes to maintain heat and potency. Boring, exhausting, and absolutely critical. "How long will this take?" Caleb asked after the fourth compress change. "Tonight, several hours. Overall, days, maybe weeks." "Weeks?" He said it like a curse. "Healing doesn't happen on your schedule." Mara didn't look up from her work. "If you want fast results, there's the door. If you want actual recovery, sit down and be quiet." Catherine made a sound that might have been a laugh. "I like her." "You're delirious," Caleb muttered, but he sat down. The first hour passed in tense silence, broken only by the sound of water being poured, cloth being wrung, Catherine's occasional whimper when the compress hit a particularly tender spot. Mara worked with methodical precision, monitoring Catherine's responses, adjusting the herbal mixture based on what seemed to help most. "Tell me about the pain," she said during one compress change. "Is it sharp or dull?" "Both." Catherine's hands gripped the sheet. "Sharp when it comes on, like needles. Then it settles into this ache, like something's pressing from the inside." "And the episodes, when did they start getting worse?" "A month ago, maybe. At first it was just at night. Now it's all the time." Mara nodded, filing the information away. Classic progression of infection, starting manageable, escalating to unbearable. Morrison should have caught this. A competent doctor would have. "You're Dr. Morrison," she said carefully, aware of Caleb's presence. "What treatments did he try?" "Drops," Catherine said. "Some kind of solution. Burned like hell. Sorry, Caleb. Burned terribly, but he said that meant it was working." "Working to do what?" "Slow the deterioration," he said. "Keep me from going completely blind." Mara's jaw tightened. Drops for deterioration when the problem was infection. Not just incompetent, dangerous. She caught Caleb staring at her. "What?" she asked. "You think he was wrong?" "I think he treated the wrong disease." She changed the compress again, checking Catherine's eyes for any change. Too early to tell. Degenerative conditions and bacterial infections require completely different approaches. He gave her something to slow deterioration when what she needed was something to fight infection. So he made it worse. "I can't say that without examining his notes." "But you're thinking it." Mara met his gaze. "What I'm thinking is that your mother's been suffering unnecessarily. What I'm doing is trying to fix it." Caleb stood abruptly and left the room. Mara heard his boots on the floorboards, the front door opening and closing. Catherine sighed. "He's been like this for months," she said quietly. "Angry at everything, terrified of everything. He wasn't always this way." "People change when someone they love is dying." "I'm not dying yet." There was steel in Catherine's voice. "Though I've certainly felt like it some days, the pain, you can't imagine." "Actually, I can." Mara prepared another round of compresses. "My mother had a patient once with the same condition. Different cause, but same symptoms. The pain drove him half mad before she figured out the treatment." "Did he recover?" "He did. Took 6 weeks, but he regained most of his sight." "Most?" Some damage had already been done, but he could see well enough to work, to read, to recognize faces. Better than complete blindness. Catherine was quiet for a long moment. "You're giving me hope." I'd forgotten what that felt like. Hope's dangerous if it's not earned, but I think we have a real chance here. The door opened again. Caleb returned carrying 2 mugs of coffee, steam rising from both. He handed one to Mara without speaking, then retreated to his corner. She sipped it, strong, bitter, exactly what she needed, and continued working. The second hour brought the first sign of progress. Catherine's pain decreased enough that she stopped flinching when Mara applied the compresses. Her breathing evened out. She even managed a few minutes of sleep between treatments. "It's helping," Caleb said, and it wasn't a question. "It's early yet, but yes, I think so." "What happens if it doesn't work?" Mara considered lying, offering false reassurance. But Catherine deserved truth, and so did he. "If this doesn't work, we try other methods. There are more aggressive treatments, though they're riskier. And if none of it works," she paused, "then we focus on managing pain and preserving what sight remains." That's what Morrison said. Manage and preserve. Morrison gave up before trying. There's a difference. Caleb drank his coffee, watching his mother sleep. "She raised me alone after my father died. Worked this ranch herself when most men said it couldn't be done. Taught me everything. Writing, roping, reading, arithmetic, everything. And now she can't even see my face anymore. The grief in his voice was so raw it hurt to hear. Mara focused on her work, giving him space to feel without the weight of her attention. When the clouding started, he continued, she made me promise not to let her become a burden. Said if she went blind, I should find someone to help run the ranch and she'd step back, like she could just stop being necessary. He laughed bitterly, as if that's how it works. Is that why you've been testing women? Looking for someone who can handle the ranch work? Testing. He repeated the word like it tasted bad. The town calls it cruelty. Maybe it is, but I can't afford someone who will break the first time things get hard. This land is unforgiving. The work never stops. Winter kills the weak, and disease kills everyone else. I need, he trailed off. A partner, Mara finished. Not a wife. A partner who can survive what you're surviving. Nobody uses that word. Partner. It's always wife. Like marriage is about romance and companionship instead of shared labor and mutual survival. Marriage in frontier country is practical. Everyone knows it, but nobody says it. You say it. Mara shrugged, changing Catherine's compress. I don't see the point in pretending. My mother married my father because he was a strong hunter and she needed protection while healing people. He married her because she could keep him alive through injury and illness. They respected each other, relied on each other, maybe loved each other eventually, but the foundation was survival. What happened to him? Hunting accident when I was 12. Bear got him before he could get the bear. My mother tried everything, but the wounds were too severe. He died in our cabin 3 days later. I'm sorry. Don't be. He lived the life he chose, died doing what he loved. There are worse endings. Catherine stirred, mumbling something in her sleep. Mara checked her eyes again, still too early for visible improvement, but the inflammation around the tear ducts looked less angry. Good sign. You should rest, she told Caleb. I'll stay with her. I'm not leaving her with a stranger. I'm not a stranger. I'm the person trying to save her life, and you're no use to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion. I'm fine. You're swaying on your feet. He was. Mara watched him blink hard, fighting to focus. When had he last slept? Days, probably. Between ranch work, caring for Catherine, and the constant stress of watching her deteriorate, the man was running on fumes. There's a chair right there, Mara pointed to the corner. Sit. Close your eyes for 10 minutes. I'll wake you if anything changes. 10 minutes. 10 minutes. He lasted 8 before his head dropped forward and sleep took him. Mara continued her work, moving quietly to avoid waking either patient. The fire needed tending. She added wood, adjusted the logs for even heat. Catherine's water cup was empty. She refilled it. Small tasks that her mother had taught her were just as important as the medicine itself. Comfort aided healing. The third hour brought complications. Catherine woke suddenly, thrashing against her restraints with renewed vigor. The calm from earlier evaporated into panic so intense it filled the room like smoke. Get it off, she screamed. Get it off me! Mara tried to hold the compress in place. Catherine, you need to stay calm. It's burning. You're burning my eyes. It's not burning. It's the medicine working. Liar, you're killing me. Caleb jolted awake, nearly falling from his chair. He reached the bed in 2 strides, grabbing Mara's wrist. What did you do? Nothing. This is a normal reaction. Sometimes the infection fights back before it breaks. She's in agony. She's experiencing the treatment working. Let me finish. Get away from her. He shoved Mara back, sending her stumbling into the table. The bowl of herbal infusion tipped, spilling across the floor. Catherine continued screaming, clawing at her face. Mara caught herself against the wall, her mother's journal sliding from the table. She grabbed it before it hit the wet floor and held it up. Page 47, she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. Read it. What? Page 47. Read the section on bacterial eye infections. Caleb stared at her like she'd lost her mind. His mother's screams filled the space between them. Read it! Mara thrust the journal at him. He snatched it, flipping pages with shaking hands. Found the right section. His eyes scanned the careful handwriting, his mother's own documentation of Thomas Wright's case. Day 3 of treatment, he read aloud, his voice barely audible over Catherine's cries. Patient experiencing severe burning sensation and increased pain. This is expected. The infection is reacting to the treatment. Critical that we continue despite distress. Stopping now will allow infection to strengthen and spread. He looked up at Mara. Is this true? Every word. Your mother needs to get through this. If we stop now, we lose all progress and the infection gets worse. But I need your help to hold her still while I finish the treatment. Caleb looked at his mother, then at the journal, then back at Mara. The weight of the decision pressed down on him visibly. Trust a stranger with his mother's life, or trust his instinct that this was torture, not healing. Please, Mara said quietly. I know what I'm doing. He set the journal down carefully, moved to the bed, and gripped his mother's shoulders. I've got her. Do what you need to do. Mara worked fast. Fresh compress, properly heated, the right herbs and the right concentration. Catherine bucked and screamed, but Caleb held her steady, murmuring reassurances that got lost in the noise. Mara secured the compress with clean bandaging, covering both eyes completely. Now we wait, she said, stepping back. How long? 20 minutes. If the pain doesn't decrease by then, I'll remove them and we'll try something else. It was the longest 20 minutes of Mara's life. Catherine's screams faded to sobs, then to whimpers, then to exhausted silence. Her breathing slowed. Her body went limp under Caleb's hands. Mama? His voice cracked. Mama, can you hear me? Here? I'm here. Catherine's voice was barely a whisper. The pain's less. It's still there, but less. Mara closed her eyes briefly, exhaling relief. That's good. That's exactly what should happen. Caleb sagged against the bed. Jesus Christ. Can I remove the bandaging now? Mara asked Catherine. I need to see how your eyes responded. Go ahead. Mara carefully unwound the bandages. The compresses came away stained with discharge, thick, yellowish, the visual confirmation that infection was draining. Exactly what they wanted. She examined Catherine's eyes in the firelight, looking for changes. The clouding remained, but the redness had decreased significantly. The tear ducts, which had been swollen and inflamed, looked less angry. And when Mara held her hand up, moving it slowly across Catherine's field of vision, I can see that, Catherine breathed. Just a shadow, but I can see your hand moving. You couldn't before? Nothing, just light and dark. But now there's shape, movement. Caleb made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. He pressed his fist against his mouth, shoulders shaking. Don't celebrate yet, Mara warned, though she felt the same urge. This is progress, but we have a long way to go. The infection's draining, which is good, but we need to continue treatments every few hours for at least 3 days before we'll know the full extent of recovery. 3 days, Catherine repeated. And you'll stay? Keep treating me? Mara hesitated. She hadn't thought beyond tonight. Staying meant, what, days at the ranch, in close proximity to Caleb Vance and his complicated grief? Days away from her cabin, her routine, her safety. But walking away now would be like abandoning someone mid-rescue. The infection was draining, yes, but it could return with vengeance if treatment stopped. I'll stay, she said, until you're stable. Thank you. Catherine reached out blindly. Mara took her hand, feeling the calluses from years of ranch work, the tremor from weeks of pain. Thank you for not giving up when it hurt. My mother taught me that healing and hurting sometimes look the same. The difference is what comes after. Caleb straightened, wiping his eyes roughly. You need anything? Food? A place to sleep? Food would help. And yes, sleep, but not yet. I need to do another compress change in 30 minutes. I'll fix something. He paused at the door. And Mountain Girl? Mara. Thank you. He left before she could respond. Catherine squeezed her hand. He's not good at gratitude, she said. Pride runs deep in the Vance family. But he means it. I know. Do you? Catherine's clouded eyes seemed to look right through her. Or are you one of those people who deflects kindness because you don't think you deserve it? The observation was so accurate it stung. Mara gently extracted her hand and busied herself preparing the next round of compresses. I'm just doing what needs doing, she said. That's deflection. Catherine settled back against her pillows. My husband used to do the same thing. Couldn't accept a compliment to save his life. Always had to diminish his own worth. Like being good at something was shameful. Maybe some people just prefer action over words. Or maybe some people have been told they're worthless so many times they started believing it. Mara's hand stilled over the bowl. You don't know me. No, but I know that look. That way of holding yourself like you're apologizing for taking up space. I had it too once, before I decided I was done apologizing for existing. How'd you manage that? Catherine smiled, a ghost of expression on her pain-worn face. Married a man who saw me when nobody else did. Built a life on land nobody else wanted. Raised a son everybody said would fail. Spite's a powerful motivator. Spite? Nothing makes you stronger than proving everyone wrong. You should try it sometime. Before Mara could respond, Caleb returned with a plate of bread and cold meat, plus another cup of coffee. He handed it to her without comment and returned to his corner chair. Mara ate mechanically, tasting nothing. Her mind kept circling Catherine's words. Been told they're worthless so many times they started believing it. Was that what happened? Had the town's dismissal burrowed so deep she'd internalized it as truth? No. That was too simple. She'd been invisible long before her mother died, had learned early that being overlooked was safer than being noticed. In a place like Ridgefall, standing out meant becoming a target. Better to fade into the background, to be the mountain girl nobody remembered. Except now someone was remembering her. Two someones, actually. And the attention felt wrong, like wearing clothes that didn't fit. The fourth compress change went smoothly. Catherine dozed through most of it, exhausted from pain and panic. Mara worked in silence, monitoring progress with the focused attention her mother had drilled into her. Every detail mattered. Every small change could indicate improvement or decline. By the fifth hour, dawn started creeping through the window. Gray light replaced firelight, revealing the room's shabby condition, peeling wallpaper, water stains on the ceiling, furniture that had been good quality once but now showed years of hard use. The Vance Ranch was failing. Not dramatically, but steadily. The way things failed when there weren't enough hands to maintain everything. Caleb had fallen asleep again in his chair, his head at an angle that would give him neck pain for days. Catherine slept fitfully, occasionally mumbling words Mara couldn't understand. The house settled around them with creaks and groans, old wood adjusting to temperature changes. Mara allowed herself a moment to simply exist in the quiet. No immediate crisis, no one demanding anything, just the slow, steady work of healing and the strange intimacy of caring for strangers who'd become something more than that in the span of a single night. Her mother would have liked this. The challenge, the problem-solving, the moment when treatment shifted from theory to visible progress. Mary Quinn had lived for these moments, when knowledge transformed into action and action into healing. "I wish you were here," Mara whispered to the empty air. "You'd know what to do next." But her mother wasn't here. Just Mara, her mother's journal, and the weight of responsibility for two lives that had been invisible to each other until desperation made them collide. She checked Catherine's eyes again. More discharge, which was good. Less swelling, also good. The clouding remained unchanged, but that was expected. Clearing the infection came first, then they could address the damage it had caused. Caleb stirred, jerking awake with a gasp. He looked around wildly before remembering where he was. "How is she?" he asked hoarsely. "Stable, the infection's draining properly, pain's manageable, we're doing well." "What time is it?" "Near dawn. You should eat something. Real food, not just bread." "I'm fine." "You're not. You can't help her if you collapse." He scrubbed his hands over his face. "You always this bossy?" "Only when people are being stupid about their own health." Catherine laughed softly from the bed. "I like her, Caleb. If you send her away after this, I'll disown you." "Nobody's sending anybody away," he muttered. "Not yet, anyway." Mara prepared another compress. "I'll need to examine your supplies later. See what you have for ongoing treatment once I leave." "When will that be?" "When I'm confident the infection won't return." 3 days minimum, maybe longer. "And you'll teach me what to do for maintenance?" "If you're willing to learn." Caleb stood and stretched, joints popping audibly. "I'm a rancher, not a healer, but for her, I'll learn whatever you'll teach." "Good, because this next part's going to be tedious. Multiple compress changes daily, monitoring for any sign of regression, strict hygiene protocols. It's boring, repetitive work. I spent last month mucking stables and mending fence. Boring doesn't scare me. Then we'll start lessons after breakfast." He nodded and left the room again. Catherine waited until his footsteps faded before speaking. "You're good for him," she said. I'm treating your eyes, not counseling your son. Both need healing. His heart's been closed off so long I worried it might never open again. That's not my concern. Isn't it? Catherine's voice was gentle. You rode through a winter night to help people who hadn't asked for help. That speaks to someone who cares deeply, even if they pretend otherwise. Mara focused on her work, unwilling to examine that observation too closely. Yes, she'd ridden through dangerous conditions. Yes, she'd risked rejection and humiliation, but that didn't mean… What? That she cared? Of course she cared. You didn't endure what she'd endured last night without caring, but caring didn't require emotional investment. It was just decency. Basic human decency. Except when had basic decency ever motivated someone to ride 3 hours in freezing darkness? She pushed the thought away. This wasn't about her motives or her feelings. This was about healing Catherine, teaching Caleb, and returning to her cabin before the town noticed her absence and started asking questions. Simple, practical, clean. So why did her chest feel tight when she thought about leaving? Caleb returned with eggs and bacon, plus a third cup of coffee that Mara accepted gratefully. They ate in silence, the food settling heavily in stomachs too long empty. Outside, the ranch was waking up. Horses neighing, chickens clucking, the wind picking up as true morning arrived. I've got livestock to tend, Caleb said, finishing his plate. Can you manage alone for an hour? Go. We'll be fine. He hesitated at the door, looking between Mara and his mother like he was trying to decide if trusting them together was wise. Finally, he grabbed his coat and left. Catherine waited exactly 3 seconds before speaking. Tell me about your mother, she said. The woman whose knowledge you carry. Mara changed the compress, considering how much to share. She was a healer, one of the best. Learned from her grandmother, who learned from hers. Knowledge passed down through generations. And now it's yours. Now it's mine. That's a heavy inheritance. So as a ranch, Mara adjusted the bandaging. At least knowledge doesn't require mucking stables. Catherine laughed, then winced as it jostled her tender eyes. True enough. But land you can sell. Knowledge dies with you if you don't pass it on. I'm not dead yet. No, but you're alone. No apprentice, no daughter of your own to teach. What happens to all that knowledge when you're gone? The question hit harder than it should have. Mara had avoided thinking about that particular future, the one where she died on her mountain and everything her mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother had known died with her, breaking a chain of knowledge that stretched back further than anyone could remember. I don't know, she admitted quietly. Then maybe you should think about it before it's too late. They fell into silence after that. Mara continued her treatments, monitoring Catherine's progress with the detached focus that kept emotion at bay. But the question lingered like smoke. What happens to the knowledge when you're gone? She didn't have an answer, and that perhaps was the most frightening thing of all. The second day brought worse pain than the first. Catherine woke screaming at noon, her body arching off the bed with such force that Mara nearly lost her grip on the compress she'd been applying. The woman's hands clawed at the bandages, frantic to rip them away, and Mara had to physically restrain her while shouting for Caleb. He burst through the door, eyes wild. What's happening? The infection's breaking. Mara wrestled Catherine's arms down. This is the crisis point. Either it breaks completely or it spreads. Help me hold her. Caleb grabbed his mother's shoulders, pinning her against the mattress. Catherine thrashed beneath them, her screams tearing through the house like something being murdered. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the discharge leaking from beneath the bandages. You're killing her, Caleb's voice cracked. This is torture. This is healing. Mara checked the compress, soaked through with thick discharge, more than yesterday. Good. Terrible, but good. The infection's fighting back before it dies. We have to get through this or lose everything. She's in agony. I know. Mara's hands shook as she prepared a fresh compress, this one with stronger herbs. Her mother's journal had warned about this moment, the point where the patient's pain became unbearable, where everyone involved questioned whether the cure was worse than the disease. This is when most people give up, her mother had written. This is when you prove whether you're a healer or a coward. She applied the new compress despite Catherine's screams, despite Caleb's horrified expression, despite every instinct that told her to stop causing pain. The heat from the herbs hit the infected tissue, and Catherine's screams reached a pitch that seemed to vibrate the walls. Then, suddenly, silence. Catherine went limp. For one terrible heartbeat, Mara thought she'd killed her. Then she saw the woman's chest rising and falling, saw her lips moving in wordless exhaustion. "Mama?" Caleb's voice was barely a whisper. "Mama, can you hear me?" "It stopped," Catherine breathed. "The pain. It just stopped." Mara peeled back the compress carefully. What she saw made her stomach turn even as relief flooded through her. Thick, putrid discharge covered the cloth, the infection draining all at once, expelled by the aggressive treatment. Catherine's eyes, still clouded but visibly less inflamed, had stopped producing the angry redness that had characterized the infection. "It broke," Mara said, and her voice shook despite herself. The infection broke. Caleb stared at his mother's face, then at Mara. "Is it over?" "The worst of it, yes, but we need to continue treatments to make sure it doesn't return. And we won't know the extent of vision recovery until the inflammation completely subsides." "How long?" "Days? Maybe a week?" Catherine reached up blindly, her hand finding Caleb's arm. "I can feel the difference," she said. "The pressure behind my eyes. It's less. Like something that was pushing out finally stopped." That's exactly what happened. Mara cleaned the discharge carefully, documenting everything in her mind the way her mother had taught her. The infection was building pressure against the eye tissue. Now that it's draining, the pressure releases. "Will I see again?" The question hung in the air, weighted with desperate hope. Mara chose her words carefully. "Some vision should return. How much depends on the damage already done. But you'll see more than you do now. I'm confident of that." It wasn't false hope. The infection had broken before causing complete destruction, but it also wasn't a guarantee of full recovery, and Mara wouldn't lie about that. Catherine seemed to understand. "Some is better than none," she said quietly. "Some is a miracle." Caleb stood abruptly and walked to the window, his shoulders rigid. Mara watched him stare out at his ranch, at the land he'd been fighting to save, and saw the exact moment his control shattered. His hand came up to cover his face, and his whole body shook with silent sobs. "Go to him," Catherine whispered to Mara. "He won't accept comfort from me. Too proud. But maybe from you. I'm not the person for that. You're the only person here." Mara hesitated, then set down her supplies and crossed to the window. She stood beside Caleb, not touching, not speaking, just present. Sometimes that was enough. "I thought I was losing her," he said eventually, his voice raw. "Every day watching her fade, knowing there was nothing I could do. The helplessness of it." He laughed bitterly. "I've faced down wolves, broken horses, survived blizzards that killed stronger men. But watching my mother go blind, that was the thing that finally broke me." "You're not broken." "No?" He turned to face her, and the grief in his eyes was bottomless. "I've spent months driving away anyone who might help because I was too afraid they'd fail, too afraid to hope. And then you show up, this woman I've never noticed, who nobody notices, and you do what I couldn't. You actually help." "I haven't finished yet. Don't celebrate until—" "I'm not celebrating," he cut her off. "I'm trying to say thank you and making a mess of it because gratitude isn't something I've practiced much." Mara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They stood together at the window, watching the morning sun burn off the frost, and the silence between them felt less empty than it should have. The peace lasted exactly 3 hours. Mara was in the kitchen preparing the next round of medicine when Caleb came in from the barn, his face pale. "Something's wrong with the cattle," he said. "What kind of wrong?" "They're sick. 3 of them can barely stand. Foaming at the mouth, stumbling." He grabbed his rifle from the rack. "I need to check the others, make sure it's not spreading." "Wait." Mara's instincts prickled. "When did you last check them?" "This morning. They were fine." "And now, 6 hours later, they're dying? That's not a natural illness. That's poison." Caleb stopped mid-step. "Poison. Animals don't go from healthy to dying in 6 hours unless something external caused it. Did you put out new feed? New water source?" "No. Same feed as always. Same creek for water." His jaw clenched. "Someone poisoned my cattle. Or something got into the water supply." Mara grabbed her coat. "Show me." They ran to the barn together. The 3 sick cows were exactly as Caleb described. stumbling, foaming, their eyes rolling in distress. Mara examined them quickly, checking their mouths, their breathing, looking for symptoms that might indicate the poison's source. "This is plant-based," she said, recognizing the signs from her mother's notes on accidental poisonings. "Probably hemlock or nightshade. Small amount, deliberately administered." "Deliberately." Caleb's voice went cold. "Someone came onto my property and poisoned my livestock. We need to make them purge, now, before it spreads through their system." Working together, they forced a mixture down each cow's throat that induced violent vomiting. It was brutal, messy work, but it saved their lives. Within an hour, all 3 animals had expelled the poison and were shaking but stable. Caleb checked the rest of his herd while Mara examined the feed and water. She found the contamination in a corner of the feed trough, crushed hemlock mixed with grain, hidden where casual inspection wouldn't spot it. "Here!" she called. Caleb came running. Someone knew what they were doing. This wasn't random. This was targeted. "Who would—" He stopped, and his expression shifted from confusion to fury. "The land." "What?" "My land. The water rights." He paced in tight circles, energy coiling like a spring. "After my father died, there were men who wanted to buy this ranch, offered good money. I refused. My mother wanted to keep it, and I wanted to prove I could run it myself." "Who were they?" "Businessmen from back east said they wanted to develop the area, bring in more settlers. But really they wanted the water rights. This ranch controls access to the best creek in the territory." Mara's mind raced. "And if you failed? If the ranch fell apart? They could buy it cheap or just wait until I couldn't pay taxes and take it from the county." He kicked the fence post hard enough to splinter wood. "They've been waiting for me to fail, and my mother going blind. That was their opportunity." "You think they're behind her illness?" "No, that's just bad luck. But they'd use it. Push me while I'm down, make things worse, force me to sell. Poisoning cattle is serious. That's not just business pressure. Out here, business and violence blur together pretty quick." Caleb checked his rifle, making sure it was loaded. "I need to know who did this." "You need to be smart about this," Mara countered. "Running off angry gets you killed." "So I just let them sabotage my ranch?" "No, you gather evidence, make it public, force them to back off. Fighting in the dark only helps them." Caleb stared at her. "You've thought about this." "I've watched people try to drive my mother off her mountain. Same tactics. Subtle sabotage, spreading rumors, making life difficult until she gave up. She didn't. She documented everything, brought it to the territorial governor when it got bad enough. The harassment stopped." "Your mother sounds like she was something." "She was." Mara touched the journal in her pocket. "And she taught me that intelligence beats violence every time." "I'm not feeling particularly intelligent right now." "Then it's good I'm here." Despite everything, Caleb almost smiled. "Yeah, I guess it is." They returned to the house to find Catherine sitting up in bed, the bandages removed from her eyes. She turned toward the door as they entered, and Mara's heart lurched. "Catherine, you're not supposed to—" "I can see shapes," the older woman interrupted, and wonder filled her voice. "Blurry, indistinct, but shapes." "You're there, Caleb, and you're beside him, Mara. I can see you both." Caleb crossed the room in 2 strides, kneeling beside the bed. "Mama, how much can you see?" "Not much. It's like looking through thick glass, but it's more than yesterday. More than I've seen in months." She reached for his face, her fingers tracing the scar on his cheek. "I'd forgotten what you looked like." "I was starting to forget." Mara watched them together, mother and son, connected by blood and land and shared struggle, and felt like an intruder. She should leave, give them privacy. But Catherine's hand shot out, surprisingly accurate, and grabbed Mara's wrist. "Don't you dare leave this room," she said. "You're part of this now, like it or not." "I'm just the healer." "You're more than that, and you know it." Catherine's clouded eyes somehow pinned Mara in place. "You saved my sight. You saved my son from giving up. And now someone's trying to destroy us, which means they're trying to destroy you too. That's not— They poisoned our cattle while you were here. You think that's coincidence?" Catherine's grip tightened. "Whoever's behind this knows you're helping us. That makes you a target." The words hit like cold water. Mara hadn't considered that. She'd been so focused on healing Catherine, on the immediate crisis, that she'd missed the larger picture. If someone wanted the Vance Ranch to fail, they'd remove any obstacle to that failure, including a healer who might save Catherine's sight. "We need a plan," Caleb said, his voice hard. "Something better than waiting for the next attack." "I might have something." Mara pulled her mother's journal out, flipping to a section near the back. "My mother documented every poisoning case she treated, including sources. Hemlock grows wild in some places, but nightshade is harder to find. You need to know where to look." So if we can figure out where the poison came from, we might track it back to who gathered it. And that tells us who's behind the sabotage." Caleb leaned over her shoulder, studying the journal. "Your mother was thorough." "She had to be. One wrong plant could kill instead of heal." "There's only 3 places within riding distance that grow nightshade," Catherine said from the bed. "The old Morrison property, the ridge behind the church, and the Patterson homestead." "Morrison." Caleb's voice went flat. "As in Dr. Morrison?" "The same. His family's been here since before Ridgefall was Ridgefall. They own half the valley." Mara's mind raced. "Your Dr. Morrison treated Catherine's eyes, diagnosed it as degenerative, when it was actually bacterial. What if that wasn't incompetence? What if it was deliberate? Why would a doctor sabotage his own patient?" "Because he's not just a doctor. He's a landowner, a businessman, someone with interests beyond healing." Catherine made a small noise. "His brother is Judge Morrison, the one who handles property disputes and tax seizures." The pieces clicked together like a lock opening. A doctor who misdiagnosed. A judge who could seize property. Businessmen who wanted the land. It wasn't 3 separate problems. It was one conspiracy using different faces. "We need proof," Mara said. "Real evidence, not just suspicion." "How do we get that?" "I go to town, talk to people, see what I can learn about Morrison and his connections." "You?" Caleb shook his head. "That's dangerous. If they know you're investigating..." "Nobody notices me, remember? I'm the mountain girl, invisible. That makes me perfect for asking questions nobody thinks matter." "She's right," Catherine said. "People talk around those they don't see. And Mara's been invisible her whole life." It should have stung, hearing it stated so plainly. But Mara had spent 20 years learning to weaponize her invisibility. In a town that overlooked her, she'd learned to observe everything, to hear conversations people thought were private, to gather information without drawing attention. Being invisible had always felt like a curse. Maybe it was time to make it a tool. "I'll go tomorrow," she said, "after I check Catherine's eyes and prepare enough medicine to last while I'm gone." "I don't like this," Caleb said. "You don't have to like it. You just have to trust me." Their eyes met across the small room. Something passed between them. Not quite trust, not yet, but the possibility of it. The recognition that they were in this together now, whether either of them had planned it. "Fine," he said finally, "but you take my spare horse, faster than that mountain pony of yours, and you're back by sundown. No exceptions." "Agreed." Catherine settled back against her pillows, a small smile on her face. "You two work well together, like you've been partners for years instead of days." "We're not partners," Caleb and Mara said simultaneously, then stopped and stared at each other. Catherine's smile widened. "Of course not. My mistake." That night, Mara couldn't sleep. She lay in the small guest room Caleb had offered, barely more than a closet with a cot, but warmer and more comfortable than her cabin, and listened to the house settle around her. Every creak might be an intruder. Every gust of wind might be someone approaching. Her mother had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now every instinct screamed danger. They'd caught the cattle poisoning in time, but what about the next attack? What if whoever was behind this escalated? What if they came directly for Catherine or Caleb or... The thought stopped her cold. When had she started including herself in that list? When had the Vance's danger become her danger? "When you decided to stay," a voice in her head answered. "When you chose involvement over safety." She'd spent 3 years on her mountain, isolated and safe. No attachments meant no vulnerabilities. No connections meant no pain when people inevitably left or died. It was a lonely existence, but loneliness was familiar. Loneliness was survivable. This, caring about people, being part of their lives, facing threats alongside them, this was new territory, dangerous territory, but also necessary? The word felt strange even thinking it. She didn't need the Vances. She could leave tomorrow, return to her cabin, Let them handle their own problems. She'd done her part. Catherine's infection was broken. The rest was just maintenance, except leaving now would be abandoning people who needed her. And whatever else Mara was, she wasn't someone who abandoned people in need. Even if it meant making herself visible. Even if it meant risking the safety and visibility provided. She rose before dawn and checked on Catherine. The woman was sleeping peacefully, her breathing even, no signs of pain. Mara changed her bandages, applied fresh medicine, and left detailed instructions for Caleb. "You sure about this?" he asked, walking her to the stable. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." "That's either brave or stupid." "Probably both." Caleb saddled his spare horse, a gray mare with intelligent eyes and a steady temperament. "Her name's Ash. She's fast and smart. Treat her right and she'll get you through anything." Mara swung into the saddle, adjusting her seat. The mare shifted beneath her, testing this new rider, then settled. "Be careful," Caleb said, and the concern in his voice surprised them both. "People in town, they're not always what they seem." "I know. I've been watching them my whole life. From a distance. This is different. This is walking into the middle of things." "I'll be fine." "You better be. Because if something happens to you—" He trailed off, looking uncomfortable with wherever that sentence was going. "My mother would be upset. The infection might return without proper care." "Right. Your mother. Of course." Their eyes met. Neither looked away. "Go," Caleb said finally, "before I change my mind and lock you in the barn for your own safety." "You could try." "I probably could. You're not that big. Size isn't everything." "No, but it helps." Was this banter? Mara wasn't sure. She'd never bantered with anyone. It felt strange, like wearing unfamiliar clothes, but also oddly comfortable. She urged Ash forward, and the mare responded smoothly. They took the ridge road toward town, morning sun painting the mountains gold and pink. Beautiful country, hard country, the kind that killed the careless and broke the weak. Mara had survived 20 years in this land. She'd survive this too. She reached Ridgefall by mid-morning. The town looked the same as always, shabby buildings clustered around a muddy main street, people going about their business with the grim determination of those who knew winter was coming. Mara tied Ash outside the general store and went inside. The shopkeeper barely glanced at her. Trading or buying? Information, actually. Mara placed a silver coin on the counter, more money than she usually spent in a month. "I'm looking for someone who knows about the Morrison family business." The shopkeeper's eyes widened slightly at the coin, then narrowed with suspicion. "Why?" "Personal matter. Nothing illegal." Morrisons are powerful people. Don't like folks asking questions. "Then it's good I'm nobody important." Mara pushed the coin forward. "Just point me toward someone who talks." The shopkeeper pocketed the coin. "Try old Jacob. Usually at the saloon this time of day. Man knows everything about everyone, and liquor loosens his tongue faster than prayers." Mara found Jacob exactly where promised, nursing a whiskey that smelled like it could strip paint. He squinted at her as she approached. "Mountain girl," he wheezed. "Don't usually see you twice in 1 week. I'm looking for information about Dr. Morrison, his business dealings, his family connections, especially anything related to land acquisitions." Jacob's bloodshot eyes sharpened. "That's dangerous talk." "That's why I'm asking you instead of him directly." He laughed, then coughed violently. "Smart. All right, I'll tell you what I know. But it'll cost you." Mara placed another coin on the table. Jacob made it disappear faster than his drink. "Morrison family's been consolidating power for years," he said, voice low. "Doctor diagnoses problems that force sales. Judge brother handles the legal theft, and their cousin, he's the one with the Eastern money, buying up everything they acquire. Clean on paper, dirty as hell in practice." "What kind of problems lead to forced sales?" "The kind that make running a property impossible. Mysterious livestock deaths, equipment failures, and sometimes," he paused significantly, "sometimes the owners themselves get sick. Nothing fatal, usually, just debilitating enough they can't work. And when they can't work, they can't keep their land." Mara's blood ran cold. "Catherine Vance." Her eyes. "Can't say for certain, but I know Morrison treated her, and I know Judge Morrison's been asking questions about the Vance property taxes. Coincidence makes people nervous in this territory." "How do I prove it?" You don't. Not without getting killed. Jacob drained his glass. Morrisons have their hands in everything. Sheriff's office, mayor's position, half the town council. You accuse them without ironclad proof, you disappear. Quietly. Permanently. But if someone had proof, then they'd need to go higher. Territorial governor, federal marshal, someone outside the Morrisons' reach. He studied her with surprising clarity. You planning something stupid, mountain girl? Just gathering information. Information gets people killed, same as accusations. But he leaned closer. There's a clerk at the land office, Timothy Ross. He's young, idealistic, hasn't been corrupted yet. If there's paperwork showing the pattern, forced sales, mysterious illnesses, Morrison acquisitions, he'd know where to find it. Would he help? Maybe. If you convince him it's the right thing, Jacob laughed bitterly. Good luck with that. Right thing doesn't pay well out here. Mara thanked him and left, her mind spinning. She had confirmation of her suspicions, but confirmation wasn't proof. She needed documentation, paper trail, something undeniable. The land office was a small building near the courthouse. Mara approached carefully, watching for anyone who might recognize her or question her presence. But as always, people looked through her like she was transparent. Inside, a young man sat at a desk buried under ledgers and files. He looked up as she entered, blinking in surprise. Can I help you? Timothy Ross? Yes? I need to see records of property transfers over the last 5 years, specifically ones involving the Morrison family or their business partners. Timothy's pleasant expression froze. Those are public records, but may I ask why? I'm investigating a pattern of forced sales that might constitute fraud. That's a serious accusation. That's why I'm looking at records instead of making accusations. Mara met his eyes. I just need to see the truth, whatever it is. Timothy stared at her for a long moment, then made a decision. I'll need an hour to pull the files. Come back at noon. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. If those files show what I think they show, we're both in danger for looking at them. Mara spent the next hour wandering town, observing, listening. She overheard conversations about the Vance ranch, about Caleb's failures, about how it was only a matter of time before the property changed hands. The talk was casual, unconcerned, like people discussing inevitable weather. No one mentioned Catherine's sudden improvement. Either Caleb hadn't told anyone, or the information hadn't spread yet. Good. The longer their enemies remained ignorant, the better. At noon exactly, Mara returned to the land office. Timothy had 3 large ledgers spread across his desk, his face pale. I shouldn't show you this, he said, but you're going to anyway. Because someone needs to see it. He turned the ledgers to face her. These are property transfers over 5 years. Notice the pattern? Mara studied the entries. Again and again, the same progression. Morrison treats a landowner for illness. Landowner's condition worsens or other problems arise. Property falls behind on taxes or loans. Judge Morrison oversees the legal proceedings. An Eastern investment company, Morrison and Associates, purchases the property at below market value. 17 properties in 5 years, all following the exact same pattern. This is systematic, Mara breathed. It's criminal. Timothy's hand shook slightly. But proving it requires connecting Morrison's treatments to the subsequent problems. That's nearly impossible without medical records, which Morrison controls. What about testimony? If people whose properties were taken testified about their experiences, most left the territory. The few who stayed are too frightened to speak up. The Morrisons have made examples of anyone who challenged them. Then we need evidence they can't deny. Something that connects Morrison directly to sabotage or deliberate misdiagnosis. Timothy looked at her like she'd suggested flying to the moon. How? I don't know yet, but this, she gestured to the ledgers. This is the foundation. Can you make copies, something I can take to higher authority? Copying these would take days, and if Morrison finds out I helped you, he swallowed hard. I have a family. I understand. Mara did. Fear was reasonable when you had people to protect. Can I at least take notes? Document the pattern? Quickly, and if anyone asks, you forced your way in here, I tried to stop you. Deal! Mara worked fast, her mother's journal serving as her notepad. She copied property names, dates, amounts paid, Morrison connections. The evidence wouldn't hold up in court, hearsay and circumstantial, but it established the pattern clearly enough that a real investigation would find the truth. She was finishing the last entry when the door opened. Dr. Morrison stood in the doorway, his expensive suit and calculated smile radiating false warmth. Behind him stood two men Mara didn't recognize, thick-necked, hard-eyed, the kind hired for violence rather than conversation. "Miss Quinn," Morrison said pleasantly. "What an unexpected pleasure. I wasn't aware you had business with the land office." Mara closed her mother's journal slowly, keeping her movements calm despite her racing heart. "Just researching property records. Public information." "Of course. Public information." His smile didn't waver. "Though I'm curious why the mountain girl, forgive me, Miss Quinn, would suddenly develop an interest in land transfers." "Education. Never too late to learn." "Indeed." Morrison stepped into the office, his men flanking him. "Timothy, would you give us a moment? I'd like to speak with Miss Quinn privately." Timothy looked between them, fear and duty warring on his face. "Sir, I should stay." "That wasn't a request." The young clerk fled. Smart boy. Mara stood her ground, though every instinct screamed to run. "If you're trying to intimidate me, you'll need to be more direct. Subtle doesn't work well on people who have nothing to lose." Morrison's smile finally cracked. "You have more to lose than you realize. Catherine Vance, for instance. Her recovery is quite remarkable. Almost miraculous, given my prognosis. Turns out your prognosis was wrong. Or your treatment is temporary. Bacterial infections can return, especially when improperly managed. Such a shame if all that progress reversed because the healer made a critical error. The threat was clear as mountain water. Help Catherine and face consequences. Stop helping her and avoid retaliation." "You poisoned the Vance cattle," Mara said flatly. "You've been sabotaging their ranch, waiting for them to fail so you could seize the property." Wild accusations without evidence. Careful, Miss Quinn. Slander is actionable. So is conspiracy to commit fraud. An attempted murder, if we're counting Catherine's deliberate misdiagnosis. Morrison's pleasant facade evaporated completely. "You're playing a game you don't understand. This territory belongs to people with power, and you—" He gestured dismissively. "You're nobody. The mountain girl nobody remembers exists. One word from me and you'll face charges for trespassing, theft, practicing medicine without license. I'll bury you so deep nobody will find the grave." "Then do it." Mara's voice was steady despite her fear. "Arrest me. Bury me. But know that everything I've learned is already documented. And if something happens to me, that documentation goes straight to the territorial governor." It was a bluff. She had no such arrangement, but Morrison didn't know that. His eyes narrowed. "You're lying." "Maybe, but can you afford to take that risk?" They stared at each other across the small office. Outside, the town continued its daily rhythm, oblivious to the confrontation happening in their midst. Finally, Morrison stepped back. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "You've made an enemy you can't afford, Miss Quinn, and enemies have a way of meeting unfortunate accidents in this territory. I'll take my chances." Morrison left, his thugs following. Mara waited until their footsteps faded before allowing herself to shake. That had been stupid, reckless, possibly suicidal. But it had also bought time. Morrison now knew she was investigating, which meant he'd be cautious. Careful criminals made mistakes. She just had to survive long enough to catch him making one. Timothy crept back into the office. "Are you insane? You just threatened Dr. Morrison." "I told him the truth." "There's a difference. The truth gets you killed." "So does silence." Mara headed for the door. "Thank you for your help. And if anyone asks, I forced my way in, and you couldn't stop me." "That's actually true at this point." Mara almost smiled. "Good. Makes it easier to sell." She rode back to the ranch faster than safe, pushing Ash hard. The mare responded beautifully, her hooves eating up the miles. They reached the Vance property just as the sun touched the mountains. Caleb was waiting in the yard, rifle in hand. He lowered it when he recognized her. "You're late," he said, but relief colored his voice. "I ran into complications." Mara dismounted, her legs unsteady. "We need to talk. All of us." Inside, Catherine was sitting up without assistance, her bandages off completely. The improvement was startling. Her eyes still showed clouding, but less, and she tracked movement with surprising accuracy. "You can see me," Mara said, surprised. "Blurry, but yes, I can see you." Catherine's expression shifted. "What happened in town? You look like you've seen trouble." "I found it. Or it found me." Mara laid out everything. The land office records, the pattern of forced sales, her confrontation with Morrison. By the end, both Vances sat in stunned silence. "He threatened you," Caleb said finally, his voice dangerously quiet. "Morrison threatened you directly. He threatened all of us, but yes, specifically me. That settles it. You're not going back to your cabin, too isolated, too vulnerable. You stay here where I can protect you." "I don't need protection." "Like hell you don't." Caleb stood, pacing like a caged animal. "Morrison's ruthless. If he sees you as a threat, he'll eliminate you, quietly, legally, or violently. Doesn't matter which. You stay here. That's not negotiable." "You can't just decide." "Actually, I can. You're on my property, under my protection, and anyone who wants to hurt you goes through me first." They glared at each other, both stubborn, both refusing to back down. Catherine cleared her throat. "Children," she said mildly, "perhaps focus on the actual problem. Morrison knows we're investigating. He'll escalate. We need to be ready." She was right. Mara forced herself to think tactically instead of emotionally. "We need real proof. Something that connects Morrison directly to sabotage or fraud. Medical records, witness testimony, physical evidence." "How do we get that?" "I don't know yet, but sitting here waiting for the next attack won't help." "Then what do you suggest?" Mara thought back to her mother's journal, to all the cases documented there. Her mother hadn't just treated patients. She'd investigated causes, tracked sources, connected patterns others missed. "We investigate like healers," she said slowly. "We look at symptoms, find the source, treat the disease at its root." "Meaning?" "Meaning we examine every attack, every sabotage attempt, every piece of this conspiracy. We document everything, find the pattern, and use that pattern to predict Morrison's next move. Then we catch him in the act." "That's risky." "Everything's risky now, but waiting just gives him time to destroy us piece by piece." Caleb looked at his mother, then back at Mara. "All right, we fight back, but we do it smart, no unnecessary risks." "Agreed." Catherine smiled despite the danger. "Look at you two, actually working together instead of arguing. It's progress." "We're not—" Both started, then stopped. Catherine's smile widened. "Of course not." That night, Mara lay in the guest room again, but sleep remained elusive. They'd made an enemy of powerful people. Tomorrow would bring consequences. The only question was what form those consequences would take. Outside her window, an owl called. Once, twice, then silence fell like a held breath. And in that silence, Mara made a decision. She'd spent 20 years invisible, overlooked, dismissed. But invisibility only worked when you wanted to hide. Now she wanted to be seen. Wanted Morrison and his conspiracy to know that the mountain girl they'd ignored was the one who would bring them down. She just hoped she survived long enough to do it. The attack came 3 nights later, and it wasn't subtle. Mara woke to the smell of smoke and Caleb's voice shouting her name. She stumbled from bed, pulling on boots and coat without thought, and ran toward the sound. The barn was burning, flames crawling up the wooden walls like living things, orange light turning the night into false day. "The horses!" Caleb was already running toward the structure, and Mara grabbed his arm hard enough to bruise. "You'll die in there." "Then I'll die saving them." He tried to shake her off, but she held firm, using her weight as leverage. "Listen." She forced him to meet her eyes. "The fire's too advanced. You go in there, the roof collapses, and we lose you and the horses. We need water, blankets, a plan." "There's no time for—" A beam crashed inside the barn, sending sparks skyward. The horses screamed, high and terrified. Catherine appeared on the porch, her recovering eyesight enough to see the disaster unfolding. "Caleb, no!" Her voice cut through his panic. "Your father died rushing into a fire. I won't lose you the same way." That stopped him. Mara felt the fight drain from his body, replaced by something worse. Helpless rage at circumstances he couldn't control. She understood that feeling intimately. "Check the cattle," she told him, her voice sharp with command. "Make sure this isn't covering another attack. I'll handle the barn." "How can you Just go." He went. Mara ran for the well, her mind calculating. The barn was lost, but they could prevent the fire from spreading to the house or other structures. She hauled water with Catherine's help, the older woman moving carefully but capable, and they created a wet barrier between the barn and everything else. By dawn, the barn was a smoking skeleton. They'd saved the house and managed to rescue one horse, Ash, who'd kicked down her stall door and bolted to safety. The others were gone. 6 good horses, reduced to ash and memory. Caleb stood in the wreckage, his face blackened with soot, and Mara saw the exact moment he broke. Not dramatically, no shouting or tears, just a quiet collapse of spirit, the weight of loss finally exceeding his capacity to carry it. "They're escalating," Catherine said, joining Mara by the well. Her eyes were red from smoke and grief. "Morrison wants us destroyed completely." This wasn't Morrison directly. Mara studied the burn pattern. Fire started in 3 places simultaneously. Professional arson, probably hired men. Morrison stays clean while we burn. "Can you prove it?" "Not yet, but I will." The promise tasted like ash in her mouth. They spent the morning salvaging what could be saved: tools, tack, anything the fire hadn't claimed. Caleb worked mechanically, not speaking, locked inside his own head. Mara wanted to say something comforting, but had no idea what comfort looked like in circumstances like these. Catherine, however, knew exactly what to say. She walked up to her son, placed both hands on his shoulders, and forced him to look at her. "This is what they want," she said quietly. "They want you broken, defeated, ready to give up. Are you going to give them that satisfaction?" "Mama, I've got 1 horse, no barn, cattle that might be poisoned any day, and enemies who just proved they'll burn us alive if we don't surrender. What exactly am I supposed to do?" "Fight back." Catherine's voice held steel. "Not with fire or fists, but with truth. Morrison's powerful because people fear him, but fear only works when it's hidden in darkness. We drag him into the light, we take away his power." "You sound like Mara." "Mara's been right about everything so far. Maybe we should keep listening to her." Both of them turned to look at Mara, who was examining what remained of the barn's support beams. She felt their attention and glanced up. "What? How do we drag Morrison into the light?" Caleb asked. Mara set down the charred wood she'd been studying. "We make him expose himself, force him to act directly instead of through intermediaries, and we do it in front of witnesses he can't intimidate or buy." "Such as?" "The territorial governor's representative. He's due in Ridgefall next week for quarterly inspections. If we can present evidence of Morrison's conspiracy at a public town meeting, with the governor's man watching, Morrison can't silence us without exposing himself." Catherine nodded slowly. "That could work, but we need ironclad evidence, something undeniable. I've been thinking about that." Mara pulled out her mother's journal, flipping to the notes she'd made. Morrison treated 17 patients whose properties were later seized. If even 3 or 4 of them would testify about their treatment and what followed, that establishes the pattern. "Most of them left the territory," Caleb said. "The ones who stayed won't talk, too scared. Then we find ones who left, track them down, convince them to return and testify. That's days of writing, maybe weeks. The governor's representative will be here in 7 days." Mara's mind raced through possibilities. 7 days wasn't enough time to track down scattered witnesses. But maybe they didn't need those witnesses. Maybe they needed something better, something Morrison couldn't explain away. "His medical records," she said suddenly. "If we can get Morrison's treatment records for those 17 patients, we can show the pattern of misdiagnosis and negligence. It's not just my word against his, it's his own documentation proving he deliberately harmed people." "Those records are in his office," Catherine pointed out. "Locked up, guarded, completely inaccessible." "Nothing's completely inaccessible." Caleb stared at her. "You want to break into Morrison's office and steal his medical records. I want to retrieve evidence of criminal activity. There's a difference." "Not legally, there isn't. I'm willing to take that risk. I'm not willing to let you." Caleb crossed his arms. "Morrison already threatened you. Getting caught stealing from him means jail at best, disappearing at worst." "Then I won't get caught." "You're a healer, not a thief. I'm whatever I need to be to stop people from dying." Mara's voice hardened. "Morrison deliberately misdiagnosed your mother. He poisoned your cattle. He burned your barn. How many more people has he hurt? How many more will he hurt if we do nothing? The question hung between them, weighted with implications none of them wanted to examine too closely. Finally, Catherine spoke. She's right. We can't fight power with more power. We don't have it. We fight with truth. And if that means taking risks, she shrugged. Dying safe in bed means nothing if you live like a coward. Mama, I didn't raise a son who backs down from what's right just because it's dangerous. Your father certainly never did. Caleb looked between the two women in his life, both stubborn, both determined, both willing to risk everything for principle, and something in his expression shifted. The defeat disappeared, replaced by grim determination. Fine, he said, but we do this smart. Planning, preparation, backup plans. No rushing in blind. Agreed, Mara said. And I'm coming with you. You get caught alone. It's your word against Morrison's. You get caught with me. At least we're both witnesses to whatever happens. That doubles the risk. That's non-negotiable. You want to do this? We do it together. Mara wanted to argue, but recognized the futility. Caleb had the same stubborn set to his jaw she saw in her own reflection. Some fights weren't worth having. Together then, she agreed. They spent the next 3 days preparing. Mara scouted Morrison's office, noting entrances, windows, the patterns of when he left and returned. Caleb worked on securing the ranch, repairing what could be repaired, preparing for another potential attack. Catherine continued her recovery, her eyesight improving daily until she could read again with some difficulty. On the third night, Mara finalized the plan. Morrison kept late hours on Thursdays, meeting with business associates at the saloon until well past midnight. His office would be empty from 8 until at least 1 in the morning. That gave them a 5-hour window. We go in through this back window, Mara explained, sketching a rough map. It's old, doesn't latch properly. I've watched Morrison struggle with it a dozen times. We slip inside, find the medical records, copy what we need, and leave everything exactly as we found it. What if someone sees us? Caleb asked. The office backs onto an alley nobody uses after dark. As long as we're quiet, we're invisible. And if Morrison comes back early, then we hide, wait for him to leave, and finish the job. Or we abort completely if the risk gets too high. Mara met his eyes. I'm not interested in getting caught any more than you are. Catherine watched them plan with an expression Mara couldn't quite read. When they finished, she spoke. You two work well together, like you've been doing this for years. We've been doing this for 6 days, Caleb muttered. Sometimes 6 days is enough. Catherine's smile was knowing. I spent 6 days with your father before I knew I'd marry him. Sometimes people just fit. We're planning a break-in, not a wedding, Mara said quickly. Of course, my mistake. Thursday arrived too quickly and not quickly enough. Mara checked her supplies 3 times, lockpicks her mother had taught her to use, a small lantern with a hood for controlled light, blank paper for copying records, her mother's journal for reference. Everything necessary, nothing excessive. Caleb prepared with similar care, checking his knife, his rope, the various tools that might prove useful. Neither spoke much. Words felt dangerous, like they might crystallize the fear both were working hard to suppress. They left the ranch after sunset, telling Catherine they'd be back by dawn, or not at all. If they didn't return, she was to ride to the territorial capital and report everything to the governor herself. It wasn't a perfect backup plan, but it was better than nothing. The ride to Ridgefall took 2 hours. They tied Ash in a grove outside town and approached on foot, staying in shadows, moving like ghosts. Mara's heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands stayed steady. Fear was fine. Panic was fatal. Morrison's office sat above the pharmacy, accessed by external stairs. The building was dark, the street empty. Thursday night in Ridgefall meant most folks were either at the saloon or home sleeping. Perfect conditions. They climbed the stairs carefully, testing each step before committing weight. At the top, Mara examined the back window, old wood, warped frame, exactly as she remembered. She worked her lockpicks into the gap between window and sill, applying gentle pressure. The latch gave with a soft click. We're in, she whispered. Inside, the office smelled of leather and tobacco, expensive scents that matched Morrison's carefully crafted image. Mara lit the hooded lantern, keeping the beam narrow and directed down. Caleb closed the window behind them, leaving it unlatched for quick exit. Medical records would be in the filing cabinets, Mara said, examining the room. 3 large cabinets dominated one wall, each locked. Can you handle locks? Ranch work teaches you all kinds of useful skills. Caleb produced his knife and a thin piece of wire. Within minutes, he'd picked all 3 locks. Which drawer? Patient files, alphabetically organized. We're looking for anyone Morrison treated in the 5 years before their property was seized. They worked systematically, pulling files and cross-referencing against Mara's notes from the land office. The pattern emerged quickly, almost too quickly, like Morrison hadn't even bothered hiding it. Patient after patient showed the same progression. Initial diagnosis, treatment that either failed or made things worse, escalating medical bills, final notation of patient relocated or treatment discontinued. And every single one corresponded to a property that later appeared in Judge Morrison's legal proceedings. This is insane, Caleb breathed, reading over Mara's shoulder. He's documenting his own crimes. Arrogance, Mara said, copying the relevant entries. He never thought anyone would look, or that anyone who did would dare challenge him. He underestimated you. Everyone does. Usually that's a problem. Tonight, it's an advantage. They worked for an hour, documenting 17 cases, copying treatment notes that showed clear negligence and possible poisoning. Mara's hand cramped from writing, but she pushed through, knowing this evidence was their only chance. She was finishing the last entry when Caleb grabbed her arm. Someone's coming. Footsteps on the stairs, heavy and unhurried. Not Morrison. Wrong gate. But definitely someone heading toward the office. Mara killed the lantern instantly, plunging them into darkness. They had seconds to hide. The office was sparse, desk, chairs, filing cabinets, nowhere obvious to conceal 2 full-grown people. Window, Caleb whispered. Too exposed. We'd be seen climbing down. Then where? The door handle turned. Mara grabbed Caleb's hand and pulled him down behind the desk, pressing them both into the narrow space between the desk and the wall. It was tight, uncomfortable, and would be immediately obvious to anyone who looked closely. But in darkness, with no reason to search, it might work. The door opened, lamplight spilled in, followed by 2 men's voices. You sure Morrison said to meet here? The first voice was unfamiliar, rough with drink or tobacco. This is where he conducts private business. The second voice was Timothy Ross from the land office. Anything that can't be discussed publicly. Mara's breath caught. Timothy was working with Morrison? The idealistic young clerk who'd helped her was actually part of the conspiracy? I don't like it, the first voice continued. Breaking into the Vance place, burning their barn. That's beyond what I signed up for. You signed up for whatever Morrison pays you to do, unless you want to discuss it with his brother, the judge. A pause. Then, grudgingly, no, I don't want that. Then shut up and wait. Morrison will be here soon with the next job. They settled into chairs by the window. Mara could hear them clearly from her hiding spot, could smell the whiskey on their breath and the smoke clinging to their clothes. These were Morrison's hired thugs, the ones who'd torched the barn, and Timothy was coordinating them. The betrayal stung worse than Mara expected. She'd trusted Timothy, believed his fear was genuine. Apparently she'd misread the situation entirely. Beside her, Caleb's breathing had gone carefully controlled. She could feel tension radiating from him, the instinct to fight barely held in check. She squeezed his hand in warning. Not yet. Not with witnesses who'd report straight to Morrison. Minutes dragged past. The men talked idly about their work, complaining about payment and difficult targets. Mara listened, filing away every detail. Evidence, all of it. Testimony they couldn't deny. Then Morrison's voice joined them, and Mara's blood ran cold. Gentlemen, Morrison said smoothly, thank you for coming. We have another problem that requires your particular skills. The Vance place again? Timothy asked. No, someone else, a woman who's been asking too many questions. Morrison's voice hardened. Mara Quinn, the mountain girl. She's been investigating our operations, gathering evidence. That ends now. You want us to scare her off? I want her gone, permanently. Make it look like an accident, a fall down the mountain perhaps, or exposure, something the sheriff won't question too closely. Mara's heart stopped. This wasn't just conspiracy anymore. This was premeditated murder, discussed casually like business transaction. When? The rough-voiced thug asked. Tomorrow night. She's staying at the Vance Ranch, playing healer. Wait until she's alone, handle it quietly, dispose of the body somewhere remote. Morrison paused. There's a bonus if you make Vance watch. Break him completely before we take his land. That's extra. Everything's extra with you people. Fine. Double your usual rate. But I want confirmation by Friday morning. They discussed logistics, approach routes, timing, disposal methods. Mara listened to her own murder being planned with clinical detachment and felt something shift inside her. Fear transformed into fury, cold and focused. These men thought they were untouchable. They'd destroyed lives, stolen land, and now casually ordered killings like they were discussing livestock purchases. And they expected no consequences because power had always protected them. Mara was going to prove them wrong. She waited until the meeting ended, until footsteps faded down the stairs and silence reclaimed the office. Then she and Caleb emerged from their hiding spot, muscles cramping from the prolonged tension. "We need to leave," Caleb whispered. "Now." "Not yet." Mara relit the lantern. "We need Morrison's appointment book, his financial records, anything that connects him to those men directly." "You heard him. They're planning to kill you tomorrow, which means we have until tomorrow to stop them. Where's his desk drawer?" Caleb made a frustrated noise but helped her search. They found Morrison's appointment book in the top drawer, meticulous notes about meetings, payments, coded references to acquisitions and removals. The financial records were even more damning. Payments to individuals that corresponded exactly with dates when properties were sabotaged or owners were threatened. Mara copied everything, her hand moving faster than thought. This was it. The evidence they needed, handed to them by Morrison's own arrogance. They were almost finished when voices sounded outside again. Morrison returning, and he wasn't alone. "Out!" Caleb hissed. "Window! Now!" They grabbed the copied records and scrambled for the window. Caleb went first, dropping to the alley below with practiced ease. Mara followed, clutching the papers against her chest, and her foot slipped on the windowsill. She fell badly, landing hard on her shoulder. Pain exploded through her arm, but she bit down on the cry, trying to escape. Caleb pulled her upright, and they ran. Behind them, lights flared in Morrison's office. Shouting erupted. Someone had noticed the disturbed files, the unlatched window. But Mara and Caleb were already gone, sprinting through dark alleys toward the grove where they'd left Ash. They didn't stop until they'd put miles between themselves and town. Only then did Caleb pull Ash to a halt and turn to examine Mara. "How bad is the shoulder?" "Bruised, maybe sprained, nothing broken." She tested the range of motion, wincing. "I'll live." "You better. We're not done yet." "No, we're just getting started." They rode through the night, reaching the ranch as dawn painted the sky. Catherine met them at the door, her face tight with worry that transformed to relief when she saw them. "You made it." "We did." Mara held up the copied records. "And we got everything we need." They spent the morning organizing the evidence into a coherent presentation. Medical records showing deliberate negligence. Financial records proving payments to criminals. Morrison's own appointment book documenting meetings with corrupt officials. And Mara's first-hand testimony of hearing her murder being planned. "This is enough," Catherine said, reviewing the documents. "More than enough to demand investigation." "If the territorial representative actually looks at it," Caleb said darkly. "Morrison has connections everywhere. What's to stop him from killing this too?" "Public presentation," Mara said. "We don't hand this over privately. We present it at the town meeting, in front of everyone, with the governor's man forced to respond publicly. Morrison can't silence everyone who witnesses it. He'll try. Let him try. That just proves our point." The next 3 days were tense. Morrison's hired thugs searched for Mara, but never found her. Caleb had moved her to a hidden line shack on the far edge of his property, somewhere nobody knew existed. Catherine continued her recovery, her vision now good enough to help prepare the final evidence presentation. And Mara refined her testimony, practicing until every word was precision sharp. This was her chance to be seen, to matter, to prove that the invisible mountain girl could change everything. She wasn't going to waste it. The town meeting was scheduled for Saturday at noon. The territorial representative, a severe man named Harrison Webb, arrived Friday evening and immediately sequestered himself with the mayor and Morrison. Not promising, but not unexpected. Saturday morning, Mara dressed in her mother's best clothes, brushed her hair until it shone, and practiced her speech one final time. Caleb watched her prepare with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You ready?" he asked. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." "That's brave." "That's desperate. There's a difference." "I don't think there is." He stepped closer, and something in his eyes made Mara's breath catch. "You rode through winter darkness to help a stranger. You confronted powerful men without blinking. You risked your life stealing evidence to save people you barely know. That's not desperation. That's courage." "I'm terrified." "Courage doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing it anyway." Mara wanted to say something meaningful, something that matched the moment, but words failed her, so she just nodded. They rode to town together, Catherine joining them despite protests about her still recovering eyes. "I want to see Morrison's face when his world falls apart," she'd said. "Wouldn't miss it for anything." The town hall was packed. Every citizen of Ridgefall had turned out, drawn by rumors of scandal and the rare entertainment of official proceedings. Morrison sat in the front row, flanked by his brother the judge and several stern-looking business associates. He saw Mara enter, and his eyes narrowed, but his expression remained calm. Harrison Webb called the meeting to order. "We have several items of business today. First—" "I have an urgent matter to present," Mara interrupted, standing. Her voice carried clearly despite her racing heart. "Evidence of criminal conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder." The room went silent. Webb frowned. "Miss, this is not. My name is Mara Quinn. I'm a healer, and for the past 2 weeks I've been investigating a pattern of property seizures in this territory. What I've found is systematic fraud orchestrated by Dr. Morrison, Judge Morrison, and their business associates." Morrison stood smoothly. "Mr. Webb, this woman is disturbed. She's been harassing my office, making wild accusations." "I have documentation." Mara held up the copied records. "Medical files showing deliberate misdiagnosis. Financial records proving payments to criminals for arson and intimidation. And testimony, witnessed by myself and Caleb Vance, of Dr. Morrison ordering my murder." The crowd erupted. Webb hammered for order. Morrison's face had gone white, but he maintained his composure. "These are obvious forgeries," he said, "created by someone with a grudge." "They're in your handwriting," Mara interrupted. "Dated, signed, documented, and I have 17 victims who can testify to the pattern if you'll give them the chance." "This is absurd." "Then explain the payments." Mara opened the financial ledger. March 15th, $50 to Thomas Greer, notation fence removal. The Hendersons' fence was destroyed March 16th, forcing a property sale. June 3rd, $75 to William Cratch, notation livestock management. The Parkers lost half their herd to poison June 4th. She continued reading, each entry matching a specific act of sabotage. The crowd's murmur grew louder, angrier. Webb's expression shifted from skepticism to interest. Morrison tried another tack. "Mr. Webb, I demand this woman be arrested for breaking into my office and stealing private documents." "Did she?" Webb asked mildly. "Or did she expose criminal activity that you're trying to hide?" "I am a respected physician who deliberately misdiagnosed patients to force property sales." Mara's voice cut through his protests. "Who hired criminals to burn barns and poison cattle? Who ordered my death because I discovered the truth?" She turned to Webb. "Sir, I'm asking you to investigate these claims formally, subpoena the original documents, interview the victims, examine the pattern. The evidence speaks for itself." Webb studied her for a long moment, then looked at Morrison. "Doctor, I'm going to need to see your original records. All of them. For comparison against these copies. This is outrageous. This is my authority as the governor's representative. You can comply, or I can return with federal marshals and compel compliance. Your choice." Morrison's composure finally cracked. He looked around the room, at the hostile crowd, at his brother, the judge, who was carefully distancing himself, at his business associates, who were suddenly very interested in the floor. "You have no idea what you're doing," he said to Mara, his voice low and venomous. "The forces you're challenging are just men," Mara interrupted. "Powerful men, corrupt men, but still just men. And men can be stopped. Not by you. Not by some mountain girl nobody even remembers exists. Then it's fortunate I'm done being forgotten." Webb stood. "Dr. Morrison, you're ordered to surrender all medical and financial records to my office within 24 hours. Judge Morrison, you're recused from any proceedings involving your brother's business. And Miss Quinn, he turned to Mara, you'll need to provide detailed testimony and documentation for the formal investigation. I have everything ready. Good. Webb's smile was grim. Because if even half of what you've presented here is accurate, we're looking at one of the largest fraud cases this territory has ever seen. Morrison lunged at Mara, his carefully maintained facade shattering into rage. Caleb intercepted him, and the two men crashed into chairs. The crowd surged forward, some trying to help, others just wanting a better view. In the chaos, Mara stood still, clutching her mother's journal, and felt the weight of 20 years of invisibility finally lift. She'd been seen, she'd been heard, she'd mattered. The fight was over quickly. Several townsmen pulled Morrison away, restraining him while Webb called for the sheriff. The doctor's rage had done more to confirm guilt than any evidence could. Powerful men didn't lose control unless they'd lost everything else first. Webb cleared the hall, keeping only key witnesses. Over the next hour, Mara presented every piece of evidence methodically, answering questions with precision her mother would have admired. Caleb corroborated her testimony about the barn fire and the overheard murder plot. Catherine provided details about her misdiagnosis and treatment. By the time they finished, even Morrison's business associates were backing away, unwilling to be dragged down with him. This will go to trial, Webb told Morrison. Federal court, given the scope of the conspiracy, you'll have opportunity to defend yourself, but I recommend you secure the best lawyer money can buy. Morrison said nothing. His earlier rage had burned out, leaving only hollow defeat. They left the town hall to find half of Ridgefall waiting outside. The crowd parted as Mara walked through, and for the first time in her life, she felt their attention as respect rather than dismissal. Thank you, someone called. Others joined in, people whose properties had been saved, who'd suspected corruption but lacked proof, who'd watched neighbors suffer and felt helpless. Mara nodded acknowledgement but didn't stop. She'd done what needed doing. The rest was just noise. Caleb caught up to her outside town. You all right? Ask me tomorrow. Right now I'm just trying not to collapse. Fair enough. He paused. What you did in there, that was remarkable. It was necessary. It was both. He helped her mount Ash, his hand lingering on hers. And for what it's worth, I'm glad you were too stubborn to stay invisible. Someone had to be. They rode home together as the sun set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Behind them, Ridgefall buzzed with scandal and speculation. Ahead, the Vance Ranch waited, damaged but standing, much like the people who called it home. And for the first time since her mother died, Mara felt like she belonged somewhere. Not because the land claimed her, but because she'd chosen to claim it. That night, Catherine insisted on celebrating with what little they had, coffee and the last of the bacon. It wasn't much, but it felt significant. To truth, Catherine toasted with her coffee cup. To courage, Caleb added. To survival, Mara finished, and tomorrow's problems. They drank, and the coffee tasted like victory. Tomorrow's problems arrived before sunrise. Mara woke to someone pounding on the ranch house door hard enough to rattle the frame. She grabbed her mother's journal, habit now, keeping it close, and stumbled from bed. Caleb was already at the door, rifle in hand, Catherine behind him with a kitchen knife that she probably couldn't use effectively but brandished with impressive conviction. Who is it? Caleb called. Timothy Ross, please, I need to talk to Mara Quinn. Caleb and Mara exchanged glances. The last time they'd seen Timothy, he'd been coordinating with Morrison's thugs, discussing murder like it was inventory management. Trusting him seemed dangerously stupid. But desperation had its own sound, and Timothy's voice carried it clearly. Caleb opened the door but kept the rifle visible. Timothy stood on the porch, disheveled and pale, looking like he'd aged a decade overnight. His hands shook as he held them up, showing he was unarmed. I'm sorry, he said immediately. I'm so sorry for everything. Morrison threatened my wife, my children. Said if I didn't help him, they'd disappear. I didn't know what else to do. So you helped him plan murders? Mara's voice was cold. I coordinated meetings. I didn't know what they were planning until I heard them talking that night. And when I realized you were there, hiding, hearing everything, he swallowed hard. I almost gave you away. Almost called out. But then I thought maybe if you heard it all, you'd have enough evidence to stop him. That's convenient, Caleb said. It's the truth, Timothy's voice cracked. I'm not a brave man. I'm not even a good man. But I couldn't be part of killing someone. That's where I draw the line. Mara studied him, weighing truth against deception. Her mother had taught her to read people, the small tells that betrayed genuine emotion versus performed distress. Timothy's fear looked real. His shame looked real. That didn't make him trustworthy, but it made him potentially useful. "Why are you here?" she asked. "Morrison's planning something. The arrest yesterday pushed him over the edge. He's liquidating assets, calling in favors, and I heard him tell his brother that if he's going down, he's taking everyone with him." "What does that mean?" "I don't know, but he specifically mentioned the Vance Ranch in your name. He's got men watching this place, and he's waiting for something. I don't know what, but it's bad." Catherine lowered her knife. "How many men?" "At least 6 that I know of. Hired guns from outside the territory. Morrison paid them enough that they don't care about legal consequences." Caleb cursed under his breath. "We're being watched right now." "Probably. They're positioned around the property perimeter, waiting for orders." Mara's mind raced through options. They could run, but where? Morrison had resources and reach. They could fight, but 6 armed men against 3 people, one still recovering, one a healer with limited combat experience, meant bad odds. They could wait for Harrison Webb and territorial justice, but that assumed they'd survive long enough for help to arrive. None of the options were good. "We need to get ahead of this," she said slowly. "Force Morrison to act before he's ready, in a way that exposes him completely." "How?" Caleb asked. "We give him what he wants, or make him think we are." She turned to Timothy. "You're still coordinating for Morrison?" "Until yesterday, yes. He probably thinks I still am." "Then deliver a message. Tell him I'm leaving the ranch tonight, riding back to my cabin, alone, no protection." "That's suicide," Caleb said flatly. "He'll have you killed on the trail." "Exactly. In front of witnesses we've positioned to catch him in the act." Catherine's eyes lit with understanding. "You want a beta trap?" "I want to force Morrison to act directly instead of through intermediaries. He's already facing charges for fraud and conspiracy. Add attempted murder with witnesses, and there's no talking his way out." "Assuming you survive the attempt," Caleb pointed out. "Assuming I have help positioned properly," Mara looked at Timothy. "Can you get word to Morrison without him suspecting you betrayed him?" "Maybe. He's paranoid now, but he needs me for coordination. I can probably sell it." "Then tell him what I said. Mountain girl's running scared, heading back to her cabin tonight at sunset. Easy target on a lonely trail." Timothy nodded slowly. "And what's actually happening?" "A very public ambush that proves Morrison's willing to commit murder to protect his conspiracy. We just need enough witnesses to make it undeniable. They spent the day preparing." Caleb rode to town and quietly spread word among people who'd suffered from Morrison's schemes. Families who'd lost property, victims of his medical negligence. Anyone with a grudge and a gun. He didn't tell them the full plan, just that Morrison's hired men would be making a move tonight, and that stopping them would ensure justice. Meanwhile, Mara prepared herself for the role of bait. It required looking vulnerable without actually being helpless, appearing alone while surrounded by hidden allies. Her mother had never taught her this particular skill, but survival instincts filled the gaps. Catherine insisted on being part of the witness group despite her recovering eyesight. "I want to see Morrison's face when his last play fails," she said. "That's worth the risk." By sunset, everything was positioned. 10 townspeople with rifles hidden along the trail to Mara's cabin, scattered in locations that provided both cover and clear sightlines. Caleb was closest to the expected ambush point, positioned to intervene if things went wrong. Harrison Webb, convinced by Caleb's testimony that morning, had positioned himself with federal authority to witness and arrest. And Mara rode alone on Ash, following the mountain trail as darkness fell, playing the part of frightened prey. She felt the watchers before she saw them, that prickle of attention that meant predators were tracking movement. Her hands wanted to shake, but she forced them steady on the reins. Fear was acceptable, showing it was fatal. The attack came at the narrow pass, exactly where Mara expected. 3 men stepped onto the trail ahead of her, blocking the path. 3 more materialized behind, cutting off retreat. Professional positioning, coordinated timing. These weren't Morrison's usual hired thugs. These were killers. "Miss Quinn," the leader said, his voice pleasant and utterly cold. "Dr. Morrison sends his regards." Does he? Mara kept her voice level. I'm flattered he thinks about me so much. Oh, he thinks about you constantly, about the problem you've caused, the trouble you've created. He's asked us to solve that problem, permanently. 6 armed men against 1 woman. Morrison's either very thorough or very frightened. He's careful. There's a difference. The leader stepped closer. This doesn't have to hurt. You come quietly, we make it quick. You fight, we take our time. Your choice. I choose option 3, Mara said, and whistled sharply. The hidden witnesses rose from cover simultaneously, rifles trained on Morrison's men from 6 different angles. The killers spun, caught completely flat-footed, facing overwhelming force with no cover and no escape route. Drop your weapons, Harrison Webb's voice carried authority that couldn't be ignored. You're surrounded and under arrest for attempted murder. The leader's pleasant expression evaporated. He looked around, calculating odds, and apparently didn't like the math. His gun hit the dirt. The others followed suit, hands rising slowly. Webb emerged from cover with 2 federal marshals Mara hadn't known he'd brought. They secured the hired guns efficiently while Caleb appeared at Mara's side, his rifle still trained on the prisoners. You all right? He asked quietly. Terrified, but yes. Good. Being terrified means you're thinking clearly. Webb approached Mara. That was either brilliant or suicidal, Miss Quinn. I'm not sure which. Both, probably. Did you get what you needed? Witnessed attempted murder with multiple corroborating testimonies. Combined with your earlier evidence, Morrison's finished. He turned to the lead killer. Where is Dr. Morrison now? The man said nothing. Webb's expression hardened. You're facing the gallows for attempted murder. Cooperation might reduce that to prison time. Last chance. A pause, then grudgingly. His office, waiting for confirmation we'd finished the job. Convenient. Webb gestured to his marshals. Take these men to the territorial jail. I'll collect Morrison personally. The arrests happened smoothly, anticlimactically. After weeks of tension and danger, the actual resolution felt almost disappointing in its efficiency. Morrison's hired killers were secured and transported. The witness statements were documented. The evidence was cataloged. And Mara sat on ash, watching it all happen, feeling strangely disconnected from her own victory. You did it, Catherine said, appearing beside her with vision clear enough to navigate in twilight. You actually brought him down. We did it, Mara corrected. All of us. No, this was you, your courage, your stubbornness, your refusal to stay invisible. Catherine smiled. You changed everything. The words should have felt triumphant. Instead, they felt heavy. Because changing everything meant nothing stayed the same, including Mara herself. The mountain girl who'd ridden down to help a stranger 3 weeks ago was gone. In her place stood someone visible, someone important, someone people looked to and remembered. And Mara had no idea how to be that person. The ride back to the ranch felt surreal. Caleb rode beside her in silence, both of them processing what had just happened. Around them, the townspeople who'd served as witnesses celebrated their role in bringing down corruption, their voices carrying across the dark landscape. You're quiet, Caleb observed. Thinking. About? What comes next? Morrison's arrested, the conspiracy's exposed, justice is happening, but none of that fixes your burned barn or brings back your horses or repairs the damage to people's lives. No, but it prevents future damage. That counts for something. Does it? Caleb pulled his horse to a stop, forcing Mara to do the same. He turned to face her, his scarred face serious in the moonlight. You're having second thoughts, he said, about all of this, about whether it was worth it. I'm having all the thoughts, second, third, 100th. I just exposed corruption in front of the entire territory, made myself a target for anyone with connections to Morrison, and became exactly the kind of visible I spent 20 years avoiding. And you're terrified that being seen means being vulnerable. Aren't I right? Maybe. But being invisible didn't keep you safe either. It just kept you alone. He reached over and took her hand, the gesture surprising them both. You were safer on your mountain, sure, but you weren't living. You were just surviving. There's a difference. Mara wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. He was right, damn him. She'd been surviving, not living, existing in safety but not in meaning. The past 3 weeks had been dangerous, terrifying, and more alive than anything she'd experienced since her mother died. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. How to be visible and still be myself. Nobody does at first. You figure it out as you go. That sounds exhausting. It is. But it's also worth it. His grip on her hand tightened slightly. And you don't have to figure it out alone. If you don't want to. The implication hung between them, weighted with possibilities neither had voiced until now. Mara looked at their joined hands, at his scarred face that had frightened her initially and now just looked familiar, at the ranch in the distance that had become something dangerously close to home. Your mother's going to be insufferable about this, she said. Caleb laughed, surprised. Probably. She's been planning our wedding since you walked through the door. We're not getting married. Not right now, no. That'd be rushing things. Not ever, maybe. Maybe. He smiled. But maybe not never either. They rode the last mile in comfortable silence, hands still linked, the future uncertain, but no longer quite so frightening. At the ranch, Catherine had coffee waiting and news that Harrison Webb had arrested Morrison without incident. The doctor had apparently collapsed when confronted, all his arrogance and power evaporating in the face of undeniable evidence and federal authority. He'd been transported to territorial custody and would face trial within the month. It's over, Catherine said, and relief made her voice shake. It's actually over. The legal part is over, Mara corrected. The recovery part's just beginning. And recovery was brutal, tedious work that nobody celebrated but everyone needed. The territorial government compensated victims of Morrison's fraud, though money couldn't replace lost years or stolen homes. Harrison Webb's investigation uncovered 17 additional cases of corruption beyond what Mara had documented, leading to more arrests and indictments. The town slowly rebuilt trust in institutions Morrison had poisoned. A new doctor arrived from the east, a woman who proved herself through competence rather than certificates. The land office instituted new oversight procedures. The mayor, who'd accepted Morrison bribes, resigned in disgrace. And the Vance Ranch began its own slow recovery. Insurance money from the barn fire, which Morrison's arrest proved was arson, paid for rebuilding. Neighbors who'd watched Caleb struggle now offered help, their guilt at inaction transforming into active assistance. The ranch that had been failing became viable again. Catherine's eyesight stabilized at about 70% of normal, enough to read, to recognize faces, to navigate confidently. The infection scars remained but caused no pain. She called it her souvenir from the war. Morrison started and Mara finished. I'm proud of these scars, she told Mara one morning while they worked in the new garden Mara was planting. They prove I survived something meant to destroy me. That's worth marking. Mara touched her own shoulder where the fall from Morrison's office window had left a permanent bruise that never quite faded. Her own souvenir. Her own proof of survival. Do you regret it? She asked Catherine. Everything that happened? The pain, the fear, nearly losing everything? Catherine considered. No, because it brought you here and you brought my son back to life. I just healed your eyes. You healed more than that. Caleb was dying inside long before I started going blind, closed off, angry, convinced that needing anyone was weakness. Then you showed up and forced him to accept help, forced him to trust, forced him to hope again. That sounds like I forced him into things he didn't want. Sometimes people need forcing. Sometimes the thing they fight hardest against is exactly what they need most. Catherine's smile was knowing. You fought coming here, fought being visible, fought mattering to anyone. And look at you now. Mara looked around the ranch, at the new barn being raised, at Caleb working with neighbors to repair fencing, at the garden taking root under her hands, at the life being built from the ruins of what Morrison had tried to destroy. I'm still scared, she admitted. Good. Fear means you understand the stakes. Just don't let it paralyze you. How do you not let fear paralyze you? You move anyway. You act despite it. You trust that survival is possible even when it doesn't feel likely. Catherine reached over and squeezed Mara's hand. You've already proven you can do that. Everything else is just practice. The trial happened 6 weeks after Morrison's arrest. Mara testified for 2 hours, presenting evidence so thoroughly documented that Morrison's expensive lawyers couldn't dispute it. Caleb testified about the sabotage and arson. Catherine testified about her deliberate misdiagnosis. 17 other victims added their voices, creating a chorus of accusation Morrison couldn't silence. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. guilty on all counts. Judge Morrison, who'd been forced to recuse himself from the trial, watched his brother sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison. The Eastern Investment Company that had profited from the scheme paid massive fines and restitution. The web of corruption Morrison had built unraveled completely, taking down a dozen complicit officials and businessmen. Justice, Mara learned, was neither quick nor perfect. But sometimes it was possible. After the trial, she stood outside the courthouse watching Morrison being loaded into a prison transport. He saw her through the barred window and their eyes met. She expected hatred, maybe threats. Instead, she saw something worse: incomprehension. Morrison genuinely couldn't understand how he'd been brought down by someone he'd dismissed as nobody. That incomprehension, Mara realized, was precisely why he'd failed. He'd underestimated her because she was invisible. He'd dismissed her because she was powerless. He'd ignored her because people like her didn't matter in his world. He'd never understood that invisibility could be a weapon, that powerlessness could motivate action, that people who didn't matter to him mattered to themselves and each other. She'd been underestimated her entire life. Morrison was just the latest person to learn that was a fatal mistake. 3 months after the trial, Mara's cabin on the mountain burned down. Lightning strike, purely natural, completely devastating. She stood in the ashes of her mother's legacy and felt relief. The cabin had been a prison disguised as safety, a place to hide, to remain invisible, to survive without living. She'd needed it once. She didn't anymore. Caleb found her there, sitting in the ruins with her mother's journal, the one thing she'd carried down the mountain permanently weeks ago, clutched in her lap. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know this place meant something to you." It did, past tense. Mara touched the charred remains of the doorframe. "My mother built this when she needed isolation. I inherited it, but I never chose it, and now I don't have to. So what will you choose?" The question hung there, loaded with implications they'd been dancing around for months. Mara stood, brushing ash from her clothes, and looked at Caleb clearly. "I choose visibility," she said. "I choose community. I choose being part of something instead of apart from everything. I choose—" She paused, then continued more quietly. "I choose you. If the offer's still available." "What offer?" "Partnership. The thing we've been doing without acknowledging it. Building something together instead of surviving separately." Caleb's scarred face split into a smile she'd learned meant genuine happiness. "That offer's permanent. Has been since you walked through my door and refused to leave until my mother was healed. I'm difficult, stubborn, not good at accepting help or admitting weakness. I know, I've met you, and I'm damaged. My mother's death, the isolation, 20 years of being invisible. That leaves marks that don't heal cleanly. I know that too, still here. Why? Because I'm also difficult, stubborn, and damaged. Because scars don't make you broken. Because being invisible taught you to see things others miss, and I need someone who sees clearly." He stepped closer. "Because you're the strongest person I've ever met, and the thought of doing life without you now feels impossible." "That's not very romantic." "I'm a rancher, not a poet. You want romantic, court someone else." Mara laughed despite herself. "I don't want romantic, I want real. Then you want me, because real is all I've got." "Good. I'll take it." They married in spring, a simple ceremony at the ranch with Catherine officiating and half of Ridgefall attending. Mara wore her mother's dress, carried her mother's journal instead of flowers, and spoke vows she'd written herself about choosing partnership over solitude and visibility over safety. The town that had ignored her for 20 years now celebrated her as the woman who'd saved them from corruption. It felt strange being seen, being acknowledged. But Mara was learning to accept attention without letting it define her. She was still herself, still the healer, still the daughter of Mary Quinn, still the mountain girl, just visible now instead of invisible. The ranch prospered under their combined management. Caleb handled the livestock and land management. Mara established a healing practice, treating patients in a small clinic they built beside the new barn. Catherine supervised both of them with gentle authority, her recovered sight letting her witness the life they were building together. People came from across the territory seeking Mara's medical knowledge, and she treated them all, rich and poor, powerful and powerless, visible and invisible. She charged based on ability to pay and accepted trade when money wasn't available. Her mother's practice revived and expanded, and she began training apprentices. Young women mostly, from families too poor for formal medical education, but smart enough to learn through practice. She taught them everything her mother had taught her, not just healing knowledge, but the importance of seeing people others overlooked, of giving voice to the voiceless, of using their skills to balance power instead of reinforcing it. "You're building something," Catherine observed one afternoon, watching Mara instruct 3 apprentices on treating infection. "Not just a practice, a legacy." "My mother's legacy," continued. "Yours too. Your mother healed individuals. You're healing communities. There's a difference." Mara hadn't thought of it that way, but Catherine was right. Her mother had been a brilliant healer but had worked in isolation. Mara was teaching others, spreading knowledge, creating systems that would outlast any individual practitioner. She was making sure the knowledge didn't die when she did, making sure the invisible remained seen. 1 year after Morrison's conviction, Harrison Webb returned to Ridgefall for a follow-up inspection. He found a transformed town, new leadership, new systems of accountability, new trust in institutions that had been thoroughly cleansed of corruption. "You did this," he told Mara during his visit to the clinic. "One person, willing to risk everything, changed an entire territory." "I didn't do it alone," Mara corrected. "Caleb, Catherine, the townspeople who testified, you enforcing justice. It took all of us." "But you started it. You were the spark that lit the fire." "Sparks are easy. It's the fuel that matters. The people who kept burning when things got hard." Webb smiled. "You're remarkably humble for someone who toppled a criminal empire." "I'm realistic. Morrison fell because his arrogance made him visible and his cruelty motivated opposition. I just happened to be positioned to strike the match." "And modest, too. The governor wants to commend you formally. There's talk of a territorial medal for civilian courage. Tell the governor I appreciate the thought, but I'm not interested in medals. I'm interested in making sure what happened here doesn't happen elsewhere. Systemic change, not symbolic recognition." "What kind of systemic change?" "Medical oversight, so doctors can't deliberately harm patients without consequences. Property law reform, so seizures require more evidence and transparency. Whistleblower protection, so people like Timothy Ross can report corruption without risking their families." "That's ambitious. That's necessary. Morrison wasn't unique. He was just uniquely exposed. How many others are still operating? How many communities are suffering corruption? Nobody's investigating." Webb considered her words carefully. "If I could arrange a meeting with the territorial legislature, would you testify about your experience? Advocate for the reforms you're describing?" "If it helps prevent others from suffering what we did, yes. Even though it means making yourself more visible? Drawing more attention?" Mara thought about the mountain girl she'd been. Isolated, invisible, safe, but alone. Then she thought about the woman she'd become. Visible, vulnerable, but connected to something larger than herself. "Yes," she said firmly. "Even then." The legislative testimony happened 3 months later. Mara spoke for 2 hours, presenting not just her experience, but a comprehensive analysis of how corruption flourished in frontier territories and specific policy recommendations to prevent it. Her mother's journal provided documentation. Her apprentices had helped research comparable cases from other territories. Her testimony was thorough, compelling, and impossible to dismiss. 6 months later, the territorial legislature passed the Quinn Vance reforms, comprehensive changes to medical licensing, property law, and whistleblower protection named after Mara and Caleb for their role in exposing corruption. "They named laws after us," Caleb said, reading the official notification. "That's strange." "That's legacy," Catherine corrected. "That's making sure your suffering meant something." Mara ran her fingers over the words Quinn Vance reforms and felt her mother's presence strongly. Mary Quinn had healed individuals and taught her daughter to do the same. But Mara had learned that healing could be larger than individual treatment. It could be structural, systemic, permanent. Her mother would have been proud, or possibly horrified at the visibility and attention. Maybe both. 5 years after Morrison's trial, Mara stood on the ridge overlooking Ridgefall and took stock of what had changed. The town had doubled in size, drawn by reputation for honest governance and opportunity. The ranch had expanded, employing 12 workers and supporting 3 families. Catherine's eyesight had stabilized permanently, requiring only occasional treatment. And Mara's clinic had trained 20 apprentices who'd spread across the territory, bringing healing knowledge to communities that had never had consistent medical care. The woman who'd ridden down from her mountain to help a dying stranger was gone, replaced by someone Mara was still learning to be. Wife, healer, reformer, teacher, visible in ways that still sometimes frightened her but no longer paralyzed her. Caleb appeared beside her, his presence familiar and grounding. Thinking? Reflecting, 5 years since this started. Feels like longer, and also like yesterday. Both, somehow. She leaned against him. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't come that night? If I'd stayed on my mountain? Every day. But I'm glad you didn't. Even when my visibility causes problems? When people expect things from me, I'm not sure I can deliver. Especially then. Because you deliver anyway, whether you think you can or not. Mara considered that. He was right. She'd spent 5 years doing things she'd thought impossible. Facing fears she'd believed insurmountable. Becoming someone she'd never imagined being. I miss being invisible sometimes, she admitted. It was simpler. Simpler isn't always better. No, but it was safer. So was hiding on your mountain. Didn't make it the right choice. Are you saying I made the right choice? I'm saying you made the choice that mattered. Right or wrong, it meant something. Changed things. That's more than most people can claim. Below them, Ridgefall bustled with evening activity. Lights appeared in windows as families gathered for dinner. The clinic's lamps burned late as an apprentice finished treating patients. The ranch hands secured livestock for the night. Life, continuing in the patterns they'd helped establish. Mara had been invisible once, overlooked and dismissed. She'd thought invisibility was her natural state, her permanent condition. She'd been wrong. Invisibility had been a choice, born from fear, reinforced by isolation, maintained by habit, and choices could be unmade. She'd chosen visibility instead, chosen risk over safety, community over isolation, meaning over mere survival. And that choice had cost her peace, but given her purpose. Had cost her simplicity, but given her significance. Had cost her the mountain, but given her the world. Thank you, she said to Caleb. For what? For slamming the door in my face that first night. For being desperate enough to let me help. For being stubborn enough to work with me instead of against me. I didn't slam it in your face. I just closed it firmly. You slammed it. Firmly closed it. We both know you slammed it. He laughed, and the sound carried across the ridge. Fine. I slammed it, and you wedged your foot in and refused to leave. Best choice I never made. Same. They stood together as darkness settled, watching their community prepare for night. And Mara felt something she'd thought lost forever, contentment. Not perfect happiness. Life was too complicated for that. But deep satisfaction with choices made, consequences accepted, and a future being built one difficult decision at a time. She'd been the mountain girl once, invisible and alone. Now she was Mara Quinn Vance, healer and reformer, teacher and wife. Visible, vulnerable, and improbably, vitally alive. And the town that had ignored her for 20 years now spoke her name with respect, with gratitude, with recognition that the woman they'd called invisible had been the one who changed everything. Because sometimes the people nobody sees are the ones who see everything. Sometimes the voices nobody hears are the ones speaking truth. Sometimes the individuals nobody values are the ones who hold communities together. Mara had been invisible. She'd chosen to be seen. And that choice, terrifying, costly, worthwhile, had made all the difference. Not just for her, but for everyone whose invisibility she now fought to end. Every patient treated regardless of ability to pay. Every apprentice taught regardless of background. Every reform championed to protect the powerless from the powerful. She'd learned what her mother had tried to teach her all along. That healing wasn't just about treating disease. It was about seeing people fully, acknowledging their humanity, giving them voice and agency and hope. And sometimes the greatest healing came not from medicine, but from simple recognition, from being seen, from mattering. Mara had spent 20 years being invisible. She'd spend the rest of her life making sure others didn't have to. That was legacy. That was purpose. That was enough.